Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Stranded at Baynard's, Isolation in the Deserted Roadside. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of cracked asphalt melting into the late afternoon haze. I pulled over to the shoulder, the tires crunching on the gravel, and killed the engine. The heat from the metal had radiated in waves, and the silence pressed in on me, broken only by the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the road. I rubbed my temples and tried the ignition again. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then nothing. Just a cold, empty silence. Dead battery, maybe a fuel line, or worse. I leaned my head against the steering wheel inside. Alone, no cell service, and at least a dozen miles from the nearest town, according to the map I glanced at before the phone gave out. I hadn't seen a single car pass in the last 20 minutes. The sun was lowering fast, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I grabbed my water bottle from the cup holder and took a long sip, trying to steady myself. The plan was simple: walk back to the last place I'd seen on the map, a little gas station marked just a few miles down the highway. It was the only hope I had. I grabbed my backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and stepped out into the sun-baked afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and pine sap, but there was something else, something faint and sour that I couldn't place. I squinted down the road, the horizon shimmering in the heat. The gas station should have been visible by now. Instead, I saw only the empty, cracked road and the endless trees that leaned in like silent sentinels. After about 10 minutes of walking, the road curved slightly, and I spotted it, a squat building with peeling paint and a faded sign swinging lazily from a single rusted chain. The letters were half worn away, but I could just make out the word Baynard's. A gas station, just as the map promised, though it looked like it hadn't been cared for in years. I hesitated for a moment, my heart quickening. The place looked abandoned, windows clouded with grime, a few rusted pumps standing like forgotten sentries. Then I noticed the faint plume of smoke curling from the cracked chimney at the back of the building. I stepped forward, the gravel crunching underfoot, and called out. "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. Just the wind rattling the loose shingles on the roof. I circled the front, looking for a door or a window I could see inside. The glass was thick with dust, but behind it, I thought I saw movement, something shifting in the dim interior. "Hello?" I tried again, a little louder. From the side, a door creaked open slowly, and a man stepped out. He was tall, thin, with a face that seemed carved from shadows. His clothes were faded and stained, a flannel shirt buttoned all the way to the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His eyes, pale and sharp, fixed on me without a word. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth was. "Hi." My car broke down a few miles back. I was hoping to get some help. He nodded once, slowly, then gestured toward a rusted bench near the pumps. Without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked back inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a dull thud. I hesitated, then followed. The interior was dim, lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. The air smelled stale, like old oil and dust. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with cracked cans and faded boxes, but everything looked untouched for years. The counter was cluttered with papers and a dusty jar of pennies. The man was standing behind the counter, hands folded neatly, watching me. "I'm James," I said, trying to sound confident. "My car just died. Do you have a phone? Or maybe some tools?" His lips twitched, almost a smile, but he didn't speak. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. He pointed to a page filled with neat, handwritten notes. I leaned in, curious despite myself. The page was covered with details, names, dates, places. And then I saw it, my name, written clearly at the top, with the date of my birthday underneath. I took a step back, heart pounding. How do you know my name? He looked up, meeting my eyes with an intensity that made me shiver. I've been expecting you. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked floor. The silence stretched, broken only by the slow ticking of a clock somewhere in the back room. I wanted to leave, to run back to the road and hope for a passing car, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The man's gaze never wavered, and in that moment, I realized this was no ordinary gas station. The hope I carried with me along that empty highway was already slipping away, replaced by something darker, something I couldn't yet name. A sudden creak echoed from the shelves behind him, making me flinch. His lips curled into a thin smile, like he enjoyed my unease. You came a long way, he said softly, voice rough as gravel. Not many do. That admission chilled me more than the fading light. I swallowed hard, searching desperately for words or a way out. But the room seemed to close in, and the weight of something unseen pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't sleep that night. Morning light seeped weakly through the grimy windows, casting pale, washed-out rectangles on the floor. Outside, the highway stretched out empty and relentless, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by dry grass and scrub. My car was still dead, its hood propped open like a wounded animal. I had no choice but to face the gas station again. I stood and approached the counter cautiously, the man already waiting, standing motionless, hands folded just as the night before. His eyes caught mine immediately, sharp and unwavering. There was something about them too precise, too knowing. Not the eyes of a man who simply ran a forgotten gas station. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to call someone. Can I use your phone? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached beneath the counter once more, pulling out another notebook. This one thicker, with worn edges and pages that looked like they had been turned 1,000 times. He flipped it open to a page, then pointed. I leaned in, and my breath caught. There were pictures taped to the page, faded but still recognizable. Scenes from my life, snapshots of places I'd been, faces I knew. A photo of me at a concert last year, another from a weekend trip with my sister, and one from a coffee shop I frequented downtown. Dates were scribbled next to each picture, precise down to the hour. How do you have these? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The man's lips twitched again, that same thin smile. I keep track, he said quietly. It helps me understand who comes through here. You're not the first. I stepped back, heart hammering. It wasn't just me. Others had come before, and somehow he had always known where to find them. The thought made my skin crawl. I glanced around the station, trying to find something, anything that could explain this madness. On a nearby shelf, I spotted a stack of yellowed newspapers, their dates ranging back years. I leafed through a few, catching glimpses of local headlines, missing persons, accidents on the highway, strange sightings reported near the station. The stories weren't new, but they weren't buried either. It was as if the station was a silent witness, collecting secrets no one else dared to acknowledge. Have you helped anyone before? I asked, voice shaking despite myself. The man tilted his head, considering. Help is a word that depends on perspective. Some find what they need here. Others, he let the sentence trail off, eyes narrowing. I wanted to press him, to demand answers, but the knot in my stomach tightened. There was a weight to his presence, a slow, deliberate pressure that seemed to fill the room. I realized then that this gas station wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a carefully constructed web. Trying to steady my nerves, I glanced toward the back door where he'd disappeared the night before. A faint draft slipped through the crack beneath it, carrying a scent I couldn't place, something musty, like old leather and damper. It made me shiver. "Why are you watching me?" I asked, stepping closer. "What do you want from me?" His smile faded. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. "You're not just anyone who broke down out here. You have people looking for you. People who care. I know because I watch. Because I wait." I stared at him, confused and terrified. How could he possibly know that? I hadn't mentioned my sister or anyone else who might notice if I went missing. But the man's gaze never faltered. "Why?" I whispered. "Why keep track of US?" He gave a slow, deliberate shrug. "Because stories are meant to be told. Because some endings are better left unwritten." His eyes locked with mine, and I felt the cold certainty that this was a warning, not a promise. I turned away, needing to escape the suffocating weight of that room. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, but the highway remained empty and unforgiving. I thought about my car, about the miles of road stretching in either direction with no sign of help. The man's words echoed in my mind, a dark refrain, not the first, not the last. As I walked back toward the wrecked vehicle, I noticed something I hadn't before. A thin trail of footprints led from the gas station's side door, disappearing into the scrub brush. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either, maybe from the night before. I followed them, heart pounding, until they ended abruptly near a shallow ditch. There, half buried under a layer of dry leaves, was a small, crumpled envelope. Hesitating, I picked it up and unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was neat, familiar even, but the words made my blood run cold. "You're closer than you think. Don't trust the road. Don't trust the man." I looked back toward the station. The front door was still shut, but through the grimy glass, I thought I saw movement, just the faintest flicker of a shadow. It was clear now. Leaving wouldn't be as simple as fixing a car or finding a phone. Something had been waiting for me here, and that something was still watching. And I wasn't ready to find out what it wanted. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, and edged slowly toward the side alley, eyes scanning every shadow. Morning came with a brittle clarity that cut through the cold air. I needed to make sense of what I'd found. The message, "You're closer than you think. Don't trust the road. Don't trust the man." It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a warning with no origin. Who would leave that for me? Why? And how did they know what I was facing? I glanced back toward the highway. The flat stretch of cracked asphalt disappeared into the horizon, empty as ever. No cars passed. No signs of life beyond the gas station's fading neon sign, half-lit and buzzing erratically. My car sat a quarter-mile down the road, its hood still raised in silent surrender. I had to get back to it, to try and fix the engine or at least call for help, but the man, the silent watcher, loomed like a shadow I couldn't shake. His knowledge of me, the way he spoke of my sister, my life, it defied reason. I questioned my own judgment. Was I imagining connections where none existed, or was this man truly more than just a gas station attendant? I pushed myself up and moved cautiously toward the station's front entrance. From this angle, the cracked glass door offered no glimpse inside. I reached out, fingers trembling, and tried the handle. Locked. Predictable. I circled to the side door, the one whose footprints I had followed. It was ajar, creaking softly in the morning breeze. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with the scent of spilled gasoline and something else, something faint but unmistakably metallic, like rust and old blood. My eyes adjusted to the dimness. Shelves sagged under dusty cans of oil and expired snacks. The counter was cluttered with a jumble of receipts, cigarette packs, and a single cracked photograph taped to the wall behind the register. I moved closer, heart hammering. The photograph was of a family, 2 adults and a child, smiling in a way that felt forced, their eyes too sharp, too knowing, like they were hiding something. I recognized the man in the photo. It was the gas station attendant. A sudden noise made me freeze. A slow shuffle from the back room. The door creaked open, and the man stepped out, expression unreadable. His eyes locked onto mine instantly, as if he'd been expecting me all along. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, voice rough but controlled. My car broke down," I stammered, trying to sound calm. "I'm just looking for help." He studied me, unblinking. "Help isn't always what you think it is," he said. "Especially not out here." I swallowed, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "Why do you know so much about me?" "About my sister?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small folder, worn and stained. He slid it across the counter toward me. I hesitated but picked it up. Inside were photographs, notes, even a map marked with locations I recognized: my hometown, my sister's house, places I had never told anyone I'd been. "Why?" I breathed, horror creeping in. "How did you get all this?" He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I've been waiting for you. I watch, I learn. You're not the first to end up here, and you won't be the last." Panic surged through me, but beneath it was something colder: determination. I needed to understand what he wanted, why he was keeping tabs on me and others. The folder trembled in my hands, but I forced myself to flip through the pages. One photo caught my eye: a woman, standing near an old oak tree, her face obscured by shadow. A note scrawled beneath read, "She tried to leave. They never found her." "Who?" I asked, voice barely audible. The man's eyes darkened. "People like you. Stranded. Vulnerable. They come here looking for help, and they never leave the same." A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just a gas station. It was a trap. Suddenly, the sound of an engine echoed down the highway. I spun around toward the road. A dust cloud approached, growing larger by the second. "Someone's coming," I said, hope flickering, but the man's expression didn't change. "Good," he said softly. "Because the story isn't over yet." As the vehicle drew closer, I realized it wasn't just one person inside. There were voices, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of children. The man's gaze followed the road, a faint, unreadable smile crossing his lips. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. If help had truly arrived, it could change everything. But if the man's warning was true, and this place was a trap, then whoever was coming might be walking straight into the nightmare I was desperate to escape. The dust settled. The car pulled up to the gas station, engine idling. The doors opened, and the figures stepped out. And among them, I recognized a face I never expected to see again. It was her, the woman who had vanished without a trace years ago, the one whose memory haunted my every waking moment. Her eyes scanned the empty horizon before locking onto mine, a flicker of recognition mixed with something darker. The others moved cautiously, but she stayed rooted, a silent question hanging between us. Was she here to save me, or had she become part of the nightmare too? My breath caught as the past and present collided in that charged moment. Her eyes didn't waver from mine. The man's smile tightened, like a wire pulled too taut. "You know her," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "She came here once. She stayed." His eyes flicked to the woman, then back to me, the familiar coldness settling like a weight in my chest. You think you can leave. You think you're different. But none of you ever are. The woman, her name was Anna, took a hesitant step forward. Her gaze shifted to the man, then to me, and something flickered in her eyes, fear, regret, or maybe a warning. Don't trust him, she whispered, her voice cracking. He watches. He waits. He knows everything about you because he's been watching for a long time. Her eyes locked on mine again. It's not just you. It's everyone who passes through here. He collects pieces of their lives, secrets, fears, memories, and he uses them. That's how he keeps control. I swallowed hard, the folder still clutched in my hands, its edges crumpled from my grip. The photos, the notes, the chilling evidence, they weren't just files. They were pieces of people's lives torn apart. And now Anna was here, a living proof of what happened when you got too close. I felt the cold edge of panic slip past my ribs and settle in my gut. The other people from the car trailed behind Anna, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease. The children clung to their parents, eyes wide and searching. A man with a toddler in his arms glanced nervously at the house, then back at the gas pumps that hadn't seen a proper scrub in years. I caught the mother's trembling hands, her knuckles white as she gripped the child's coat. What do you want from us? I demanded, stepping forward despite the tremor in my legs. Why do you do this? Why watch us, follow us? The man's gaze sharpened. Because you're all the same. Lost. Stranded. And you'll come looking for help here. He gestured broadly at the station, the cracked concrete, the rusted pumps. This is the crossroads where you make choices. Stay, or disappear. His eyes darkened with something terrible, pride, maybe, or satisfaction. I don't let them leave. Not once they've been marked. Anna's face twisted in pain. You don't have to stay. You can still leave. But you have to be careful. He'll try to break you first. He'll use what he knows, your fears, your secrets, to trap you. Don't give him that power. My mind raced, panic clawing through every rational thought. How had he known so much? How had he followed me, tracked the others? The folder had already shown me that. But now, standing here with Anna, I realized it wasn't just stalking, it was manipulation, control. The man was a predator, and this station was his lair. The man took a step toward me, slow and deliberate. You can't run from who you are. I see everything, your job, your family, your mistakes. I know the nights you cried alone. I know the people you've lost. You're mine now. Anna suddenly shoved past him, her voice rising. No! He's lying. You're stronger than this. You have to fight. The man didn't move, but his smile vanished. You're wasting your breath. His eyes flashed dangerously. She was weak. She forgot that. I watched Anna's shoulders slump, the fight draining from her body. She turned to the others, her voice barely a whisper. We have to stay together. Don't talk to him. Don't show him anything. A sharp noise cut through the thick silence, the distant crack of a twig snapping. Everyone froze, heads swiveling toward the tree line that bordered the empty highway. My heart hammered. Was it another traveler? Or something worse? The man's lips curled into a grin. See? You're already afraid. He raised his hand, fingers twitching like a puppeteer ready to pull strings. That fear is what keeps you here. It's what I used to keep you safe. Safe from the road. Safe from yourselves. I shook my head, the folder dropping to the ground with a dull thud. You're not safe. You're a prison. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. His presence was overwhelming, quiet, but suffocating. You can't leave. And now, with her back, he nodded toward Anna. Things will change. The others will come. And the story will get darker. Anna's eyes met mine, shimmering with tears I hadn't noticed before. He said there's a way out. But you have to find it first. The man laughed then, low and chilling. Good luck with that. From somewhere deep in the woods, a scream shattered the night. It was raw, desperate, a sound no one should ever hear. The children clutched their parents tighter, the adults stiffened, and I felt my blood run cold. Get inside, the man ordered, voice suddenly commanding. Lock the doors. Don't look outside. We moved as one, the group filing into the gas station's dim interior. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows against the peeling walls. The man stood by the door, eyes scanning the dark horizon like a hawk waiting for prey. Anna pulled me aside, voice trembling. They're coming. And this time, it won't be just strangers. What do you mean? I asked, heart pounding. She swallowed hard. Those who vanished before, they're not gone. Some came back. Changed. Dangerous. A chill spread through me. The thought of those missing people, their fates tied to this place, made my skin crawl. I looked to the man, who was watching us all with a cold, calculating gaze. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of years of secrets pressing down. Whatever hope I clung to was slipping away, replaced by a terror that was all too real and all too human. The man's voice sliced through the tension. You can't hide here. Not from me, and not from what's outside. The lights flickered violently, and the power cut out, plunging us into darkness. The scream came again, closer this time, echoing like a promise that the nightmare was far from over. And in that darkness, I realized the real horror wasn't the silence or the shadows, it was the man, watching, waiting, and knowing exactly how to break us all. The first light of dawn seeped in weakly through the grimy windows, and for a moment, the gas station looked less like a trap and more like a shelter. I sat on the edge of the counter, rubbing my wrists where the man had gripped them hours before, his knowledge still ringing in my ears. How could he have known? About my mother's funeral, the debts I'd hidden, the fights I had with Anna before this trip. It wasn't just the facts, it was the way he wielded them, like weapons aimed to unravel us. And yet, as the adrenaline faded, a strange clarity settled in. He had been afraid, too. That terrible, controlling calm, it was a shield, not strength. Anna was crouched near the back door, staring out into the empty highway. Her face was pale, etched with exhaustion, but her eyes held a new resolve. We can't stay, she said quietly, almost to herself. If he's out there, if those things he said are true, we have to keep moving. I nodded, though a part of me wanted to stay, wanted to unravel the mystery of that man, to understand the darkness this place had swallowed. But surviving meant leaving, even if it meant stepping into the unknown again. We gathered the others, their faces drawn and haunted. The children clung to their parents, too scared to speak. We shared what little food and water we had left, and I noticed how the man's presence still clung to the room, like a stain. No one looked at the gas pumps or the dusty road outside without flinching. Did anyone see which way he went? I asked quietly. Anna shook her head. No. When the power went out, I think he slipped out with the others screaming. He wanted us trapped, but maybe he underestimated us. Her words gave me the first flicker of hope. We opened the back door slowly, the hinges protesting with a drawn-out creak. Outside, the sun was a pale circle in a washed-out sky. The woods loomed like silent sentinels, the highway stretching endlessly beyond. I took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling my lungs. It was the first breath I'd taken without the taste of fear choking me. "Let's stick together," I said, voice firmer than I felt. "We can make it to the next town, or at least find a phone. We don't need to wait for help that might never come." Anna smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. "And maybe we don't have to be victims anymore." As we stepped out, the gas station shrank behind us, an old carcass of secrets and lies. The man's gaze, his threats, his knowledge, they felt like chains loosening with every step forward. The highway was empty, but not silent. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, and a breeze rustled the dead leaves. We walked, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see that cold, watchful face, but there was only sky and road, open and indifferent. I thought about what I'd learned, not just about the man, but about myself. The terror had stripped away the masks I wore, the pretenses I clung to. I was scared, yes, but I was still here. Still fighting. Still human. Anna reached for my hand as we disappeared down the highway, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed we might find our way out. Not because someone else would save us, but because we had found something stronger, our own will to survive. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was ours to choose. And that made all the difference. The sky above us was a bruised canvas, streaked with the fading hues of twilight. The air was thick with the scent of rain yet to fall, a promise of cleansing or perhaps just more chaos. We drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of road signs the only companions to our thoughts. I could feel Anna's grip on my hand tighten occasionally, a silent reminder that we were still tethered to this fragile thread of hope. Memories surfaced unbidden, faces from the past, moments of joy that now seemed like echoes from a different life. The stark contrast between what had been and what was now made the present feel all the more fragile, like glass balancing on the edge of a precipice. But despite the weight of it, I found a strange clarity settling within me. The terror had indeed stripped me bare, but it had also revealed a fundamental truth, that in the depths of despair, there is a wellspring of resilience waiting to be tapped. Anna glanced at me, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of fear and determination. Without words, we acknowledged the journey ahead wouldn't be simple or safe. There would be obstacles, both external and internal, that threatened to unravel us. But unlike before, we weren't alone in facing them. Our shared struggle had forged a bond that felt unbreakable, a silent pact to keep pushing forward no matter what. As the night deepened, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of the road that seemed almost surreal in their isolation. Small towns passed by, their windows dark and empty, like ghostly witnesses to the upheaval that had shattered normal life. It was a stark reminder that the world we had known was irrevocably changed. Yet, amid the desolation, pockets of light and life peeked through the distant glow of a campfire. The faint sound of laughter carried on the wind, proof that humanity persisted in the shadows. I shifted in my seat, drawing a slow, steadying breath. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer ruled me. Instead, it was tempered by something fiercer, hope, yes, but also defiance. We were no longer just survivors caught in a storm, we were becoming something else entirely. We were the architects of our own fate. "Where do you think we'll find shelter tonight?" I asked, breaking the silence gently. Anna's smile was tired but genuine. "Somewhere off the beaten path. Maybe a cabin or an old farmstead. Somewhere we can rest, plan, and figure out the next move." Her pragmatism was grounding. It reminded me that hope wasn't just an abstract feeling, it was action. It was making choices, no matter how small, that carved out spaces of safety and possibility. The road stretched on ahead, dark and uncertain, but it was ours to navigate. And with every mile we put behind us, the nightmares hold loosened just a little more. We were still here. Still fighting. Still human. And as long as that was true, the future, no matter how daunting, was still ours to claim. Story 2, Vanished Trails, Lost in a Shifting Forest. I've been looking forward to this trip for months, just me, my backpack, and the quiet expanse of the national park. The first 2 days passed without incident. I woke to the sharp chill of dawn, the forest still heavy with mist, and moved with steady purpose beneath towering pines and sprawling firs. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. Birds called intermittently, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I was alone, though, and it felt good. I liked the solitude, the way every step seemed to pull me deeper into a world untouched by modern noise. On the third afternoon, I reached what my map marked as the junction for the Eagle Ridge Trail. The sun was low, casting long shadows that turned the trees into dark sentinels. I stopped to check my bearings. The trail was supposed to fork left and right, but there was no fork to be found. The path continued straight ahead, narrow and overgrown, as if the split had vanished. I frowned and crouched down to examine the ground. There were faint tire tracks, but no sign of a well-worn trail diverging. At first, I thought maybe I had made a wrong turn earlier, but retracing my steps didn't match the map either. The GPS flickered uncertainly, its signal weak and unreliable. I pulled out the paper map again, smoothing it on my knee. The printed trails were clear, but the forest didn't obey the lines. Branches blocked the supposed junction, fallen logs lay across the supposed path, and the ground was uneven where the map suggested a gentle slope. Unease crept in. I scanned the horizon and noticed that some trees seemed freshly uprooted, their roots still tangled with clumps of dirt. The earth looked churned, as if a storm or some other force had recently torn through. I remembered hearing on the park's website about recent landslides in the area, but I'd assumed the trails would be marked or closed off. My pack was heavy, but my stomach tightened at the thought of being stuck here without clear directions. I decided to continue along the main path, hoping it would curve back towards something recognizable. As I walked, I kept checking my compass and the map, but the landmarks didn't add up. A small stream I expected to cross was nowhere to be found. Instead, a dry creek bed lay cracked and empty. The trees here were younger, smaller, almost as if this part of the forest had regrown after some disturbance. By late afternoon, the sun was dipping behind the ridges, and the forest grew darker, cooler. I stopped to set up camp near a cluster of rocks, trying to shake off the growing anxiety. My phone still had no signal. I ate a little, drank cautiously, and reviewed my supplies. I had enough for another day or two if I rationed carefully. That's when I heard it, voices. Low, muffled, distant. Not the usual sounds of the forest. They were human. I froze, straining to listen. The words were indistinct, but there was an urgency in the tones. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. No other hikers, no campsites. Just the dense brush and shadows growing longer. I tried calling out, but my voice felt small and swallowed by the trees. The voices stopped abruptly, as if whoever was there had heard me. A cold knot formed in my stomach. For the first time, I felt truly vulnerable. The forest wasn't just a maze of trails and trees anymore. It was a place where I wasn't alone, and whoever else was out here might not be friendly. I lay awake that night, listening to the wind rustle through the pines and the occasional snap of twigs. My mind raced with questions. Had the landslides blocked the trails? Were the park rangers aware of the closures? And most pressing of all, who were those voices, and what were they doing out here, in this tangled, shifting wilderness? I didn't know then that the map was only the beginning of my troubles, or that the forest had already begun to close in around me in ways I hadn't imagined. But by morning, I would realize that the place I thought I knew was changing beneath my feet, and that getting out might be far harder than I ever anticipated. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows between the trees, as the voices grew faint but persistent, like whispers threading through the rustling leaves. I could no longer tell if they were coming closer or drifting away, a maddening uncertainty that gnawed at my nerves. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of dry foliage beneath unseen feet, sent bolts of adrenaline through me. My hands trembled as I folded the map again, shoving it deep into my pack. I decided to press forward, hoping to find a landmark or a clearing, anything that would reaffirm my bearings. But the forest, dense and unyielding, seemed to conspire against me. The undergrowth thickened, brambles tugged at my jacket like grasping fingers, branches brushed my face as if warning me back. The trail, once faint but discernible, vanished altogether beneath a blanket of moss and fallen leaves. Just as I was beginning to doubt my direction, a sudden chill swept through the air. The temperature dropped inexplicably, the warmth of daylight retreating as a gray, oppressive mist began to seep from the forest floor. The mist curled around the tree trunks like spectral fingers, swallowing the path ahead and blurring the edges of reality. The voices returned, closer now, but no longer human. They morphed into low hums, eerie and dissonant, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. Panic clawed at my throat. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating fog, but my feet felt rooted to the earth. Something ancient and unreadable stirred in the shadows, watching, waiting. And in that moment, I understood, this forest was not just alive, it was aware, sentient, and deeply unwilling to let me leave. Dawn broke cold and gray, the mist still clinging stubbornly to the low branches and tangled undergrowth like a second skin. After a quick breakfast of dry trail mix and lukewarm water, I pulled the map back out, spreading it carefully on a flat patch of moss. I traced the faded lines with a finger, trying to reconcile the paths printed on the paper with the twisted, unfamiliar terrain around me. But the more I studied it, the more impossible it seemed. The creek that should have curved south was nowhere to be found. Instead, a swollen river, muddy and violent, roared to the east where the map showed only forest floor. The ridge I'd hoped to use as a landmark was obscured by thick, fallen trees and fresh landslide scars that hadn't been marked on any map I had. I shoved the map back into my pack, frustration coiling tight. If the park's official trails had been closed or altered by those recent landslides, as I'd suspected, no one had bothered to update any public records or signage. Worse, no cell signal meant I couldn't call for help or verify any of this. I was utterly alone, and the forest seemed to shift beneath my feet like a living trap. I decided to move cautiously, sticking to the faintest traces of trail where they existed, but after an hour of skirting thick brush and unstable earth, I stumbled upon something that made me freeze in place. A small sign, half buried in mud and hanging crooked from a bent metal post, barely visible beneath the overgrowth. It was official looking, but the paint was peeling, the warning almost illegible. I knelt down and brushed off a layer of grime. Trail closed, landslide hazard, unauthorized entry prohibited. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen any closures or warnings marked on the map, no mention of hazards beyond the usual advisories. Whoever managed the park either hadn't updated these signs or had abandoned the effort entirely. The thought settled heavy in my mind. I wasn't just lost because the forest was confusing. I was trespassing into a part of the park that had been closed for safety reasons, and I had no way out. I pressed on, moving downhill toward the sound of rushing water I hoped would lead me back toward a recognizable landmark. The ground beneath me felt unstable, and every few steps I sank ankle-deep into loose dirt or cracked twigs. The trees here were scarred, some uprooted entirely, their massive roots exposed and slick with fresh earth. The air smelled damp and raw, filled with the sharp tang of disturbed soil and broken wood. Then I heard voices again, this time unmistakably human. Low, hushed tones carried on the wind, mingling with the rush of the river. My heart hammered in response, a mixture of hope and dread flooding me. Were they park rangers? Hikers? Or something else entirely? I crouched behind a fallen log, watching the edge of the clearing where the trees thinned. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by baseball caps and heavy jackets despite the warmth of the day. They moved deliberately, speaking in clipped sentences that didn't sound friendly or casual, more like men on a mission. One carried what looked like a shovel, another held a walkie-talkie, clicking it occasionally to communicate in brief bursts. The third kept glancing around nervously, eyes sharp and alert. They didn't seem like rescue workers. Something about their posture, their tension, set my teeth on edge. I swallowed hard, pressing myself flatter against the log. The last thing I wanted was to be spotted by strangers in this place, a place where I was vulnerable and alone. Yet, I couldn't ignore the possibility that these men might be my only chance at finding a way out. As they moved deeper into the forest, the one with the walkie talked into the device again. Area's clear for now. No sign of anyone else. We'll keep it tight until nightfall. The words chilled me. What did they mean by no sign of anyone else? Were they looking for people? If so, why? And what would happen if they found me? I waited until the men disappeared from sight, then slipped quietly in the opposite direction, heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would give me away. The forest closed around me like a trap, the mist rising again from the ground, curling through the trees and dampening sound. Every step felt heavier, the weight of my dwindling supplies pressing down as relentlessly as the shadows. Hours later, I stumbled onto a narrow ridge overlooking a deep ravine. The river below roared with fresh, turbulent water, swollen from recent rains. Across the chasm, I spotted a faint glimmer of trail markers, bright orange ribbons tied to branches that hadn't existed earlier. Relief surged through me. Maybe I was heading back towards civilization after all. But as I moved closer, the ribbons ended abruptly, dangling from a snapped branch as if someone had been in a rush to remove them. Beyond the broken markers, the forest grew denser, the slope steeper and slick with mud. It was a wall of green and brown in shadow, as if the earth itself had swallowed the trail whole. I sank to my knees, exhaustion and fear overwhelming me. My water bottle was nearly empty, my stomach a hollow pit, and the sun was sinking again, promising another night trapped in this shifting maze. The men I'd seen earlier, who were they, and what were they doing out here? Did they patrol the closed areas? Or were they hunting for something or someone? I forced myself to stand, wiping sweat and dirt from my face. There was no turning back, not now. If I stayed still, I would freeze and starve. If I moved forward, I risked running into those men, or worse, falling into a part of the forest so altered it might never let me leave. As the last light faded, I caught a faint sound carried on the wind, something that didn't belong to the forest. The unmistakable click of a camera shutter, distant but clear. And then, a voice low, deliberate, and close enough to freeze me in place. "Got you on film." My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. And whatever was hunting me wasn't just watching. It was waiting. Dawn crept over the ridge with a slow, cold light that barely chased away the shadows clinging to the forest floor. I forced myself up the slope, the mud sucking at my boots as if the earth itself wanted to hold me back. The broken trail markers still hung from the branches, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I scanned the opposite bank again, searching for any sign of a path, a clue, anything. That's when I noticed it, a narrow, barely perceptible line carved into the underbrush, almost hidden beneath a tangle of fallen leaves and branches. It wasn't on my map, it was new, unmarked, and it looked fresh. I debated for a long moment, the fear and doubt clawing at me. But staying put wasn't an option, and the only alternative was to follow this ghost of a trail, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere but deeper into the maze. I crossed the ravine on a fallen log I'd spotted earlier, a precarious bridge slick with moss, and began to follow the faint line. The forest here was different. The air had an odd metallic tang, like iron or rust. The trees were scarred, bark stripped away in places, and the ground was littered with more than just branches and leaves. There were bits of plastic, fragments of torn cloth, and worst of all, discarded cans and bottles, evidence that other people had passed this way recently. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of those men, but the forest was silent except for the occasional drip of water from leaves and the distant rush of the swollen river. The trail twisted and dipped, leading me down into a small valley shrouded in mist. The fog was thicker here, and the dampness seemed to seep into my bones. Then I saw it, a clearing, and in the center, a weathered wooden cabin, half hidden by overgrown vines and shadow. It looked abandoned, but not long enough to be forgotten. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, thin and wispy in the cold morning air. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone was here. Someone who might know what was going on. I crouched behind a fallen tree, watching the cabin. The door was cracked open, and I thought I saw movement inside, a flash of fabric, the glint of eyes. My first instinct was to run, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, held me in place. I needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, a way out. I edged closer, every sense on high alert. The cabin was small, barely more than a shack, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. As I approached, the door creaked wider, and a voice, low and gravelly, called out, "You lost, stranger?" I froze, caught between the urge to flee and the need to respond. The voice was rough but not unfriendly, laced with something like caution or suspicion. I swallowed hard and stepped forward into the clearing. "Yes," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm trying to find my way out." "The trail's gone," the man interrupted, stepping into the light. He was middle-aged, scruffy, with a weather-beaten face and eyes that seemed to measure me up. Landslides, closures, and people who don't want to be found. "You're lucky you didn't end up like the others." "The others?" He nodded grimly. "There's been more than one person lost in here lately. Not just hikers, people looking for something or running from someone. That's why the park's been quiet. The rangers aren't talking, and the locals keep their distance." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Who are they?" "The men I saw." He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder before speaking. "They're not park rangers." "Not exactly. Some say they're private security, hired to keep people out. Others think they're worse. Whatever they are, they don't want anyone wondering where they're working." I swallowed hard, the pieces clicking into place. The broken ribbons, the unmarked trail closures, the strange new paths. It wasn't just nature reclaiming the park. It was something deliberate, something hidden. "Why are you here?" I asked. He shrugged, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Trying to find my daughter. She disappeared out here a few weeks ago. I'm not giving up until I do." His words hit me with unexpected force. This was no random stranger. He was as trapped and desperate as I was, maybe more. "Can you help me?" I asked, hope flickering despite the fear. "I need water, food, a way out." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I can give you some supplies. And maybe a map, but it won't be the one you have. This place has changed too much." He turned and disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a battered backpack and a folded, handwritten map. The paper was stained and creased, marked with routes and notes in hurried scrawl. "Follow me," he said, his voice low. "But be careful. They watch everything. And if they catch you..." His eyes darkened with a warning I didn't need spelled out. We set off together, moving cautiously through the thickening fog. For a while, it felt like an uneasy alliance, a shared survival against an unseen enemy. But as we pushed deeper into the forest, the sense of being hunted grew stronger. The trees whispered with movement just beyond sight, and every crack and rustle made me jump. Then, just as the sun climbed higher, breaking through the mist, we heard voices, clear, deliberate, too close. Stop right there. We froze. I glanced at the man beside me. His hand went to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of a knife. My heart slammed against my ribs. The men from the ridge. They had found us. And this time, there would be no running. I raised my hands slowly, swallowing the rising panic. The forest closed in, the shifting maze tightening its grip, and I realized there might be no way back at all. The voices had come from every direction, sharp and insistent, slicing through the fog like knives. Show yourselves, one of them barked, and I caught the harsh edge of authority in his voice. It wasn't just any group of lost hikers or park rangers. These were people who knew the land in a way we didn't. People who had claimed this wilderness as their own. The man beside me, Sam, he'd said his name was, exhaled quietly. We don't want trouble, he said, voice low, steady. We're just trying to get out. A snort, almost a laugh, came from the shadows. Out! Nobody gets out once they're tangled in this mess. Not without paying the toll. I swallowed hard. Toll? What toll? Fear knotted in my stomach, cold and unrelenting. From behind a cluster of pines, two figures emerged, their faces obscured by dark caps and jackets, their eyes hard and unblinking. One held a rifle slung loosely over his shoulder, the other's hand rested near a holstered pistol. Neither smiled. Sam took a small step forward, hands open. Listen, I'm just looking for my daughter. She went missing here. You don't have to make this harder. The rifle bearer's eyes narrowed. Your daughter, huh? Lots of people lose people here. Not all of us are willing to help find them. Some things are better left buried. His gaze flicked to me, sharp and assessing. And you, what's your story? I'm lost, I said honestly. I have supplies, but they're running out. I need to get out before. Before what? The other man interrupted, stepping closer. Before the forest swallows you whole? Before the park's ghosts catch you like they did the others? I flinched at the word ghosts, but the man's tone was so matter-of-fact, so devoid of superstition, that I knew he was talking about something else, something very real and very dangerous. Sam's jaw tightened. We don't have time for this. If you want to help or at least not make this worse, point us to a way out or leave us alone. There was a long pause. Then the rifle bearer shook his head slowly, a grin spreading that didn't reach his eyes. You're in no position to bargain. But maybe we can make a deal. You follow us, do as we say, and maybe we'll let you see the edge of this damn forest again. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I glanced at Sam, who met my gaze with a grim expression. We had no choice. The forest had swallowed any other options. We fell in behind them, the fog thickening, swallowing our footsteps. The men moved with a ruthless efficiency, their presence a constant weight pressing down on us. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of panic through my veins. I tried to memorize the path, but the shifting terrain meant even that was nearly impossible. After what felt like hours, we reached a clearing. The sun was dipping low now, casting long shadows that twisted and stretched like grasping hands. In the center stood a ramshackle cabin, half hidden by overgrown brush and fallen branches. The men stopped, glancing back at us. Inside, the rifle bearer said. "We'll talk there." The interior was cramped and dim, the air stale and thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, blood, maybe. I swallowed hard, my stomach churning. On a battered table lay scattered maps, some marked with red ink, others with lines and symbols I didn't recognize. There was a sense of organized chaos, a twisted attempt to make sense of the madness outside. One of the men slammed a fist on the table. This place used to be safe. Trails marked and maintained. Rangers with radios. Now, it's a war zone. Landslides closed off the main routes, and these fools keep wandering in, thinking they can outsmart the forest. Sam shook his head. They don't just get lost. They disappear. Kidnapped, killed. Or worse, the other man interrupted, voice low. Used. The park's got its own rules now. People come and go, but only if they pay the price. I swallowed again, feeling the cold sweat on my back. What price? The rifle bearer's eyes gleamed. You'll see soon enough. Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, a woman, tall and lean, eyes sharp as flint. She looked at me, then at Sam, with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to place. "You brought guests," she said, voice calm but edged with steel. "Interesting." Sam nodded. "We need to get out. We don't want to fight." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No one leaves without a fight. Not anymore." The tension snapped like a taut wire. The men shifted, hands moving to weapons, eyes flicking wildly between us and the door. I realized then that the forest wasn't the only danger. The real threat was right here, in this cabin, these people who had claimed the wilderness and turned it into their domain. And we were trapped. The woman stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You think you can just walk through here with your maps and your hope? This place is broken, and so are the people who wander it. You want out? You'll have to earn it." Sam's jaw clenched. "We're not your enemies." She laughed, a sound cold and bitter. "Everyone's an enemy. Especially the lost." The door slammed shut behind her, plunging us into darkness save for a single flickering lantern. Outside, the forest whispered, waiting. And I knew then that the worst was still to come. The night stretched on, thick and heavy, the flickering lantern casting shadows that danced like restless spirits on the cabin walls. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the cabin, every distant crack of a branch, set my nerves on edge. I counted the ragged breaths between heartbeats, trying to will the hours forward. When dawn finally broke, it came gray and muted, like a promise half-kept. Mara was already awake, pacing by the doorway, eyes sharp and unreadable. Sam sat on the floor, head in his hands, while I traced the fading lines on my map, the paper crinkling beneath my fingertips. "Listen," Mara said without preamble, her voice low but steady. "You're lucky I'm not the kind to kill lost hikers on sight. But I'm not here to play games. This forest isn't what it was. Landslides, closures, and people like me who make their own rules have turned it into a trap." I swallowed hard, nodding. "We know that now. But we can't stay here. We have to get out before the supplies run out." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "There's a way. A route not on your map, marked by signs only we know. Dangerous, but it leads out. You'll have to trust me." Sam looked up sharply. "Why help us? What's the catch?" Mara's eyes darkened. "Because you're the first to come this close in months without begging or fighting. And because I don't want to be alone out here anymore." Her words hung in the stale air, raw and unexpected. For the first time since we've been trapped, I sensed a sliver of hope. We spent the morning preparing, patching my torn boots with scraps of fabric, rationing the last of our food, and listening as Mara outlined the route. It wasn't a trail but a series of landmarks, a fallen tree shaped like a broken wing, a rock stained red by iron deposits, the hollow of an ancient pine where the wind sang. Navigation by memory and instinct, not by anything printed on paper. As we stepped outside, the forest greeted us like an old enemy, silent, watchful, and vast. Mara led the way, moving with a confidence born of years surviving its shifting paths. The first hours were grueling. The terrain was unforgiving, steep slopes slick with loose soil, narrow ledges crumbling beneath our feet, and the ever-present threat of another landslide. We moved carefully, each step deliberate, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. At one point, Sam stumbled, twisting his ankle on an unseen root. He bit back a cry of pain, but Mara didn't hesitate. "Keep moving. You can't afford to stop." I helped him up, and we pressed on, the forest closing in around us like a vice. By late afternoon, the sky threatened rain, dark clouds rolling in like an omen. Mara's pace quickened, urgency sharpening her features. "We're close," she said, voice tight. "There's a ridge ahead. Beyond it, the old fire road. It's rough, but it leads to the park boundary." Relief surged through me, mingled with disbelief. After days lost in a maze of shifting earth and hidden dangers, we were near escape. But as we crested the ridge, the forest opened to reveal a clearing and a group of men waiting. Their weapons gleamed, faces grim and unyielding. Mara stopped abruptly, her hand gripping my arm. "I didn't tell them you were coming," she whispered, eyes scanning the men. One stepped forward, voice cold. "Mara, you brought company." She met his gaze, unflinching. "They want out. Let them pass." He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We don't let anyone pass anymore. Not without a price." I realized then that the forest's greatest threat wasn't the shifting terrain or the landslides, but the people who had taken control, guardians of their own brutal order. Sam's face went pale. "Please, we don't want trouble. Just a way out." The leader's eyes flicked to Mara, then back to us. "You'll pay." "One of you." Panic clawed at my chest. I looked at Mara, searching for a sign, a plan. She took a step forward, voice steady. "If it's a price, let it be mine. I've been here too long." The men hesitated, then nodded. One of them stepped aside, allowing us through. We didn't look back as we moved past them, the weight of what had just passed hanging heavy between us. The fire road was rough but unmistakable, a ribbon of crushed stone and broken branches leading toward the distant hum of civilization. We walked until the sky finally broke, rain washing the grime and fear from us. When the ranger station came into view, lights flickering in the dim dusk, a wave of disbelief and relief crashed over me. Inside, I found safety, warmth, and the promise that the nightmare was ending. Later, as I sat wrapped in a blanket, the reality settled in. The forest had changed me, not just physically but in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. The wilderness was no longer an idyllic refuge but a place where human cruelty and nature's fury intertwined. I thought of Mara, of Sam, and of all the lost souls swallowed by the shifting maze of the park. Their stories, like mine, were woven into the shadows of these woods, dark and unforgettable. I knew I would never see the world quite the same way again. Out there, the forest waits, cold and indifferent. And some paths, once taken, can never be forgotten. Story 3, Lost Weekend, Unseen Memories Unraveled. I never thought a weekend could disappear like that. My name is Owen, and I live in a modest third-floor apartment in a neighborhood that's more quiet than lively. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means my days usually blur into one another, long stretches in front of the screen, occasional calls, and a handful of friends who check in from time to time. I'm not exactly a social butterfly, but I'm not a hermit either. This weekend, I was supposed to be alone, planning to catch up on some projects and maybe binge watch a few documentaries. Instead, the folder on my desktop suggested otherwise. I found it by accident, in the middle of a routine cleanup of my downloads folder. The file name caught my eye because I'm usually meticulous about naming things, and this one didn't look familiar. Opening it revealed dozens of photos, snapshots of me, or someone who looked like me, smiling, holding a fishing rod, sitting around a fire pit with a small group of people I didn't recognize. There were emails too, from an address I barely remembered, inviting me to join a weekend getaway at a lake cabin. The dates matched last weekend. At first, I thought maybe I'd forgotten after a night of heavy drinking or some kind of blacked out memory. But I don't drink much, and I'm usually very deliberate about my plans. There was no mention of this trip in my calendar, no texts from any friends about it, no receipts or bank charges that I could find. The whole thing was off in ways I couldn't explain. I sat back in my chair, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe it was a prank. Someone had access to my computer, or maybe I'd been hacked and someone planted the files. But who would do that? And why? I had no enemies that I knew of, no grudges waiting to be settled. I opened one of the emails. The subject line read, "Can't wait to see you this weekend." It was warm, casual, signed only with a first name, Maya. The tone was friendly, familiar even, but I had no recollection of anyone named Maya reaching out to me. The message mentioned packing for outdoor activities, bringing a sleeping bag, and a reminder to bring sunscreen. I checked the sender's email address. It wasn't one I'd saved or recognized, but it looked legitimate enough, not some random spam or phishing attempt. The emails continued plans for the drive, a list of attendees, messages about food preferences and carpool arrangements. The more I read, the less I understood. The photos were even more unsettling. One showed me sitting beside a woman with dark hair and a crooked smile, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Another captured me laughing with a group of people around a picnic table, but the faces were blurred or turned away, as if deliberately obscured. I wondered if the camera had been set on a timer or if someone else had taken the pictures. I tried to think back. What could have happened? Maybe I'd been drugged, I thought suddenly, a cold shiver running down my spine. The idea felt absurd but not impossible. I'm careful, usually aware of my surroundings, but sometimes things slip through the cracks. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message popped up from my friend Jenna. "You okay? You missed the usual Friday hangout." I typed back a fake excuse about being busy and needing time to myself. The truth was, I wasn't sure I was okay at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The images and emails haunted me, each one a question mark. Who invited me? Who took those photos? Why couldn't I remember any of it? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like a passenger in my own life, watching events unfold from a distance I couldn't cross. I decided to try calling the number attached to the emails, hoping for some clarity. It rang twice before a voice answered, a woman's voice, calm but cautious. "Hello? Hi, this is Owen. I found your emails about the lake house weekend. I'm sorry, but I don't remember any of it. Could you help me understand what happened?" There was a pause, and then the voice said, "Owen, you were there. You seemed fine at the time. Are you sure you don't recall?" "I'm sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't remember anything after last Thursday night. And I don't know any of the people in the photos." The line went quiet again. "Maybe you should rest," she said finally. Sometimes memories come back when you're ready. I hung up, feeling more lost than ever. Rest? How could I rest when my own mind was betraying me? I stared at the screen, the folder still open, the photos waiting to be understood. Somewhere in those images, in those messages, was a truth I needed to find. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized I was no longer sure who I could trust, not even myself. And that's when I saw the last photo, a close-up of my face, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, but the expression was not of joy or relaxation. It was fear. I didn't take the weekend off. Someone else did. And I was left to pick up the pieces. The weight of the unknown pressed down harder than ever. Every shadow in the room seemed to shift, every creak in the floorboards a warning. I had to move before the past I was chasing caught up with me. The next morning came with a sticky heat that stuck to my skin, making sleep impossible. I forced myself up and moved to my laptop. The folder with the emails and photos was still open. I clicked through the images again, this time more carefully, trying to piece together any detail that might help. The place was a lake house, somewhere remote. The emails mentioned a group outing, but none of the names sounded familiar. A few pictures showed people I'd never seen before, laughing, drinking, leaning into the camera like they were having the best time of their lives. Except me. I was never laughing. Either I was looking away or frozen in place, as if I was watching everything from behind a glass. Searching through the emails, I noticed one was sent from an address I hadn't seen before. The sender was Mara. The message was short, almost casual. Glad you made it last weekend. Hope you're feeling better now. No signature, just her name. I clicked on the sender's profile, but it was a sparse account, the kind you set up to avoid leaving a trace. No friends, no photos, no posts. I tried calling the number again, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm, asking if we could talk more about the weekend. No response. I was stuck. But I wasn't about to give up. I decided to check my phone records, hoping to find some clue about who contacted me or when I might have been drugged. I didn't expect much, but as I scrolled through the calls and messages from last week, my heart skipped. There was a text message from an unknown number sent early Friday morning, just hours before the weekend started. Ready for a break? It was cryptic, but I didn't send or reply to it. Whoever had access to my phone was watching me. My breathing quickened. Then I noticed something else, my calendar. It was empty for the weekend, no events, no reminders. But my own handwriting was there on Friday afternoon, an entry that said, Lake House Trip. I hadn't written that. At least, I didn't think I had. I opened the Notes app and found a new file titled Weekend Plans. Inside was a list of names, addresses, and times. Strange, because I never made plans like that without asking someone. I read through the list and recognized only one named Mark. Mark was someone I used to know, a college friend who had drifted away over the years. I decided to call him, hoping he might shed some light. His voice was rough when he answered. Owen? Wow, it's been a while. What's up? I hesitated, trying to sound casual. Hey, Mark. I found some photos from last weekend. You were there? There was a silence long enough to make me wonder if I'd said something wrong. Yeah, I was. You seemed out of it, man. Like you weren't really there. Did you see what happened? Or who was with me? Not really. We were all drinking, but you kept to yourself mostly. You left early Saturday morning, remember? You were kind of off. I couldn't believe it. I had apparently been there, but I had no memory. I asked about the other people, but Mark's answers were vague. He mentioned Mara once, calling her the organizer, but said he didn't know much about her either. After the call, I felt more isolated than before. The people I thought I might rely on were strangers, and the fragments of my own memory were slipping through my fingers like smoke. I decided to check the lake house itself. If I could find it, maybe I could find something, leftover bottles, receipts, anything that pointed to what I'd been drugged with or who had been involved. The emails had an address embedded in one of the headers. It was a rural area about 2 hours from the city. I grabbed my keys and headed out, trying to steady my nerves. Driving through the winding roads, the trees thickening on either side, I felt a growing unease. The sky was overcast, shadows crawling over the road like fingers. When I finally arrived, the lake house was exactly as it had appeared in the photos, an old wooden cabin, paint peeling, nestled tight against the dense forest and the dark water beyond. I circled the property, looking for signs of recent activity. Empty beer cans, cigarette butts, a broken chair on the porch. But what caught my attention was the side door ajar and swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The furniture was scattered, as if someone had been in a hurry. On the kitchen counter, I found a half-empty bottle of whiskey and several small, empty pill bottles. None were labeled. I pocketed one of the bottles and took photos of the scene. In the living room, a laptop sat open, the screen asleep, but I could see a sticky note stuck to the edge. Don't forget to check the back room. I followed the note's instruction and found a narrow hallway leading to a small room. Inside was a collection of notebooks, scattered papers, and an external hard drive plugged into a desktop computer. The notebooks were filled with frantic handwriting, names, dates, chemical formulas, and what looked like schedules. Some pages were crossed out, others circled in red. It looked like someone had been meticulously planning something. I copied the files onto a USB drive and took pictures of the notes. As I was about to leave, a sudden noise made me freeze, the sound of footsteps on the porch. I slipped into the shadows of the hallway just as the front door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, a woman, mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a cold smile. She glanced around casually but then stopped, her gaze locking onto the laptop on the table. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low but steady. I stepped out, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who are you? What is this place?" She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You really don't remember, do you? You've been very busy, Owen. Too busy to notice what's been happening." Before I could ask more, she moved toward the door and pulled out a phone. "I'm calling someone. Maybe they'll explain things better." My heart pounded. I knew I had to get out, but something inside me froze. This was no accident. This was planned. And I was in the middle of something I didn't understand. The woman's eyes flicked to me one last time, and I saw a flicker of something, regret. Malice? I couldn't tell. Then the phone rang in her hand. I knew this was only the beginning. The woman's voice was sharp on the phone, clipped and urgent, but I caught only fragments. "Not here yet, he's asking. No mistakes this time." She ended the call abruptly, slipping the phone back into her pocket like it was nothing more than a nuisance. "You're more involved than you realize, Owen," she said. "You need to stop digging. Whatever you're looking for, it's dangerous." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" She hesitated, a flicker of something, maybe pity, crossing her face before she hardened it again. "I'm someone who's been trying to protect you." Her voice dropped so low I almost didn't hear it. "And now, I'm not sure if I can anymore." Before I could respond, the sound of a car pulling up outside made her stiffen. She glanced toward the window, then back at me. "You don't have much time." I stayed frozen as the front door clicked shut behind her. The house fell silent again, save for the hum of the computer. My mind was spinning. Who was she? What had she meant about being involved? And most terrifyingly, what was I protecting or risking without even knowing it? I rifled through the notebooks again, this time more carefully. The schedules and names were still confusing, but one thing stood out, a series of dates, all clustered around the weekend I was supposed to have gone away but had no memory of. Beside each date was a time, and next to that, a list of names, none of which I recognized except one, mine. I plugged the external hard drive into my laptop. The folder titles were cryptic: sessions, reports, analysis. I clicked into sessions and found video files, each labeled with dates matching the notebooks. My hands trembled as I opened the most recent one. The screen flickered to life, showing a dimly lit room. There I was, sitting in a chair, eyes glazed over, barely moving. A shadowy figure was speaking to me, holding out a glass. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but the scene was unmistakable. Someone had been recording me while I was drugged. My stomach churned. I stopped the video and searched for another file, something that might explain what was happening. In a folder named Emails, I found thousands of messages. Quickly scanning through them, I discovered one conversation thread titled Project Mind Shield. The emails were between the woman I'd seen, whose name I finally found, Kara, and another person named Dr. Langley. Kara's messages were cautious, sometimes pleading. She spoke of progress, control, and risks. Dr. Langley's responses were clinical, cold, and demanding. One email caught my eye. Subject: Incident Report, Weekend Session. Owen exhibited unexpected resistance during the latest session. His memory gaps are increasing, but the side effects are intensifying. Recommend halting further drug administration until we can stabilize variables. I blinked, heart hammering. This wasn't just manipulation. It was an experiment. On me. Kara's reply was chilling in its pragmatism. We can't afford to lose him now. The weekend getaway was a test run. The subject's cooperation is crucial. I'm working on adjusting the dosage to minimize side effects. I slumped back in the chair, the gravity of it all crashing down. Someone had been dosing me with drugs designed to erase or alter my memories, forcing me to act under their control, and they were still trying to perfect it. The door creaked open again. I snapped the laptop shut and lunged toward the hallway, heart racing. Stop. Kara's voice was louder now, filled with urgency and something else, fear. I darted past her, sprinting outside into the fading daylight. The air was sharp and cold against my skin, grounding me. I didn't stop running until the house was a distant silhouette behind me. I found myself at the edge of a small park, breathing hard, my mind reeling. Who else was involved? What had I done during that lost weekend? Was I still under their control? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hand shaking. A message from an unknown number: "You're closer than you think. Stop digging, or it'll be the last thing you ever do." I stared at the screen, a cold dread settling over me. Whoever was behind this knew I was onto them, and they weren't bluffing. I had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and scanned the empty park. Shadows lengthened as dusk approached, the fading light doing nothing to ease the knot tightening in my stomach. Every step I took felt heavier, weighed down by the urgency gnawing at me. If they were watching, if this was a warning, then I wasn't just a pawn anymore, I was a target. I needed answers, but who could I trust? The people I'd reached out to before had gone silent, and now, even my own memories were suspect. Fragments kept surfacing, faces I couldn't place, voices whispering threats in my dreams. Fragments that hinted at something darker, something I might have done without realizing it. Pulling my jacket tighter, I made my way toward the old diner at the corner. It was a long shot, but I remembered overhearing a conversation there a few days ago, something about a name that kept coming up, Marlowe. Whoever Marlowe was, I had a feeling they held the key. But finding them wouldn't be easy. I'd have to dive deeper into the shadows I'd been running from. The buzz of my phone startled me again. Another message, same unknown number, last warning. Leave this alone if you value your life. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a countdown. And I was running out of time. The diner was nearly empty when I pushed through the door. The bells chimed too faint to cut through the low hum of late afternoon conversations and clinking dishes. I slid onto a cracked vinyl booth by the window, the faded red upholstery sticking slightly to my jacket. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down. A message from the same unknown number. Stop looking for Marlowe. He's not what you think. The words hit me like a slap. Not what I think. That only raised more questions. Who was this person sending the warnings? And how did they know what I was searching for? I tried to shake off the unease and ordered a coffee, black. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Judy, brought it over without a word. I caught her watching me from across the room, the suspicion in her gaze unmistakable. I wondered if she recognized me from somewhere. Was she connected to all this? While I waited, I pulled out my laptop and started sifting through the emails again. Something I hadn't noticed before caught my eye, a string of metadata embedded in one of the photos. It was a location tag, pinpointing a cabin in the woods, about an hour's drive from the city. The same cabin where the weekend getaway had supposedly taken place. That place had to be the next step. I closed the laptop and shoved it into my bag just as the door opened again. A man stepped inside, tall and lean, his face partially obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap. His eyes scanned the diner until they landed on me. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, recognition. Then he made his way over, sliding into the booth across from me without waiting for an invitation. I figured you'd come here, he said quietly. His voice was low, but steady. You're digging too deep. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the racing in my chest. Call me Ellis. He glanced around nervously. I know what you're dealing with. The weekend, the blackout, the photos. You weren't just drugged. You were programmed. My stomach twisted. Programmed? Like some kind of puppet? What does that even mean? Alice leaned closer, lowering his voice further. They used you. They implanted suggestions, commands, while you were under. You did things you don't remember because your mind was hijacked. I swallowed hard, the pieces of my fractured memory falling into a darker picture. Who are they? He hesitated. Marlowe. He runs a group that specializes in this kind of mind manipulation. It's not just drugs. They use psychological conditioning, hypnosis, even tech to override free will. My head snapped up. Why me? Why target me? Alice's eyes darkened. Because you're valuable. You've got access to things they want, information, connections. That weekend wasn't a vacation. It was a test run. And it worked. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. How do I stop it? How do I get my life back? Alice shook his head. You don't. Not completely. Once they've done this, the programming lingers. You'll fight it, but it'll be there, like a shadow in your mind. The only way to break free is to find Marlowe's operation and shut it down. But that's dangerous. Dangerous doesn't even begin to cover it. I glanced at the window. the sun sinking low, casting long shadows across the street. They've already threatened me. Told me to stop. Alice's jaw tightened. They don't bluff. You need allies. People who know the signs and have faced this before. Who? He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. Her name's Lena. She was a victim once, but she got out. She's helped others escape. If anyone can help you, it's her. I unfolded the paper, revealing an address and a phone number. Hope flickered in my chest, fragile but real. Before I could say anything else, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. Another message from the unknown number. You've been warned. Last chance. Alice's eyes locked onto mine, sharp and urgent. They're watching you right now. We don't have much time. The diner door slammed open again, and a group of men stepped inside. Their faces were hard, ice cold and calculating. One of them glanced at me, then at Ellis, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. Alice's hand shot under the table, gripping mine tightly for a brief moment. Get ready, he whispered. They're here to make sure you don't leave. My heart pounded in my ears as the men approached our booth. The flickering overhead light cast long, jagged shadows across the room, and for the first time, the full weight of what I was up against settled over me. I was no longer just a victim. I was a target, trapped in a nightmare where every move was watched, every step could be my last. And Marlowe was waiting. His eyes scanned the door, calculating. We don't have much time, he muttered, sliding a small, cold object across the table to me, a lockpick, thin and precise. If they try to pull you, you slip out the back. I'll cover you. The men drew closer, their faces a blur of menace. I clenched the lockpick, steeling myself for the chaos about to erupt. The door handle rattled just as I slid the lockpick into the worn latch. Fingers trembling, I worked the delicate instrument, every second stretching into an eternity. Outside, muffled voices barked orders, footsteps pacing with growing urgency. Marlowe's eyes never left the door, his hand resting casually on the hilt of a pistol barely visible beneath his jacket. A sudden creak from the hallway jolted me. The lock clicked open. Go, Marlowe hissed, springing to his feet and pushing the chair back with a sharp scrape. I slipped through the narrow opening, heart pounding, and pressed myself against the cold brick wall of the corridor. The hallway was dim, lit only by a flickering overhead bulb that buzzed ominously. Ahead, two guards rounded the corner, their boots echoing heavy and sure. Marlowe stepped from the room behind me, moving silently but with lethal purpose. He raised a finger to his lips as the guards passed, then slipped into the shadows beside me. That was too close, he whispered. We need to reach the exit without drawing attention. I nodded, breath shallow, muscles coiled like springs. As we moved, the sound of shouting erupted from the room we just left. The men had discovered I was gone. Time to run, Marlowe said. Stick close. And whatever you do, don't look back. We burst out of the building just as the first rays of dawn cracked the sky open. I slid on behind him, clutching his jacket as the city blurred past, streets empty and indifferent. For the first time in days, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion settle over me. But beneath it all, a gnawing tension remained, an awareness that this nightmare wasn't over just because we'd run from one place. Where to now? I asked, voice raw, barely above a whisper. To a safe house, Marlowe replied without hesitation. Somewhere they won't find us. I'll explain everything once we're there. The silence between us was thick, but I welcomed it. My mind was still reeling, my own memories fractured, interspersed with images I wasn't sure were mine at all. The photos, the emails, the voices in my head that weren't really mine. I had been a puppet, and someone else had held the strings. When we reached the safe house, a modest place hidden behind a veil of overgrown ivy and rusted gates, Marlowe led me inside. The interior was sparse but secure, an island of calm in a storm I didn't yet understand. He handed me a glass of water and sat across from me, his eyes steady and serious. "You were drugged," he began, voice low. "Someone used a cocktail of sedatives and hallucinogens to manipulate you. It wasn't just to control your actions during that weekend getaway, it was to erase your capacity to resist." I swallowed hard, the bitter truth settling like a stone in my stomach. But why me? What could I possibly have that they wanted? Marlowe hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, photos, and a few printed emails I hadn't seen before, correspondence between myself and a company I'd once applied to, a biotech firm with murky ethics. "They're after something you stumbled upon," he said. "Maybe unknowingly. You're connected to research they want to bury or control. They wanted to use you as a weapon, a tool for their own gain." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. I thought of the weekend I couldn't remember, friends I didn't recognize, conversations that felt staged, laughter that masked something darker. And all along, my mind had been a battleground. "What can we do?" I asked, the fight returning to my voice. "How do I take back control?" Marlowe's gaze softened. "First, you reclaim your story. Every detail you remember, every piece of evidence you find, it's a thread that, when woven together, forms the truth. You're stronger than they think, even if you don't see it yet." Over the next few days, with Marlowe's help, I sifted through the wreckage of my mind and life. We traced emails, tracked phone records, and reached out to old acquaintances who had noticed my absence but had been too scared to ask. Each revelation was a small victory, a puzzle piece snapping into place. But it wasn't just about uncovering the conspiracy. It was about reclaiming myself. The confusion, the fear, the betrayal, they were all part of me now, but they wouldn't define me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds, I sat by the window, a journal open on my lap. I had started writing again, raw, honest entries that captured everything I felt and feared. Marlowe joined me quietly, his presence a steady anchor. "You're doing well," he said, breaking the silence. I looked up, meeting his eyes. "I think I'm ready to stop running," I admitted. "To face them on my own terms." He nodded, a small, approving smile tugging at his lips. "That's good. Because they're watching, always. But you're not the scared, drugged woman they thought you'd be." The next step wasn't easy. We coordinated with a trusted journalist willing to expose the biotech company's illegal experiments and cover-ups. The evidence we gathered was damning, proof of unethical testing, manipulation, and the deliberate targeting of individuals like me. When the story broke, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Investigations launched, the company's executives faced scrutiny, and the veil of secrecy began to lift. It wasn't justice in its purest form. There were legal battles, denials, and damage control, but it was enough to feel like a reckoning. Through it all, I learned the value of trust and resilience. Marlowe became more than an ally. He was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, connection mattered. Months later, standing in a crowded cafe, I caught my reflection in the window. The eyes looking back were sharper, clearer, wary but unbroken. The past still whispered, but it no longer controlled me. I'd been a pawn in a dangerous game, but I had fought back. And now, I was ready to write the rest of my story on my own terms, no longer a victim, but a survivor. The world was imperfect and often cruel, but it was mine to navigate. And this time, I wasn't walking alone. Beside me, A familiar warmth settled as a hand found mine across the table. We didn't need words, the silent promise was enough. Together, we would face whatever came next, uncertain, yes, but unafraid. Because survival wasn't just about endurance, it was about reclaiming hope and choosing to move forward. Story 4, Endless Route, Trapped on Silent Bus. The bus was almost empty when I got on, the late hour already thinning out the usual crowd. The route home was one I knew by heart, 20 stops, a winding path through sleepy neighborhoods and shuttered storefronts. The streetlights outside blinked past in a steady rhythm, casting long, wavering shadows across empty sidewalks. It was a route I'd taken countless times, usually without a second thought. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the bus seemed quieter than usual, or the way the city's usual hum had faded into an unsettling silence. I glanced around. Just a handful of other passengers were scattered throughout the bus, their faces half hidden in shadows or buried in phones. At the stop before mine, a man had gotten on and taken the seat beside me. He was unremarkable at first glance, middle-aged, dressed in a dark jacket that looked too heavy for the mild spring night, his hair thinning at the temples. But there was something about him that didn't sit right. He didn't look at me, didn't look anywhere, really. He just stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the road through the front window, though the angle made it impossible to see what he was watching. His hands rested quietly in his lap, fingers twitching occasionally. I tried to focus on the music in my earbuds, but the faint rustle of his movements kept pulling me out of the song. I shifted my bag, feeling a prickling at the back of my neck. There was a subtle tension in his presence, like a wire pulled tight just beneath the surface. I told myself it was nothing, maybe he was just tired, or lost in thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been watching me, or rather, waiting. The bus rumbled along, the driver's face a steady, unreadable mask framed by the dim light. I noticed that despite passing several stops where people usually got on or off, the bus hadn't slowed or stopped. The digital display above the windshield showed the next stop, but the bus kept rolling past it, silent and unchanging. I tapped the emergency button near my seat. Nothing. No change in the driver's expression, no slowing of the bus. I leaned forward, calling softly, "Excuse me, can we stop here? I need to get off." The driver didn't respond. I tried again, a little louder, but the only reply was the low hum of the engine and the faint creak of the bus's suspension. Panic crept in. I looked at the man beside me, his eyes still fixed ahead, face blank but unsettlingly calm. Nobody else seemed to notice that we were passing stops, that the bus was moving farther and farther away from the places people normally got off. The other passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, their faces dim and indifferent. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal or a call to someone. The screen lit up, but the battery was low, and the service bar flickered weakly. I typed a quick message to my roommate, but the thought of relying on a dying phone in the middle of nowhere felt futile. The city lights outside gave way to stretches of darkness, the bus now on a less familiar road, one I didn't recognize from my usual ride. The man beside me shifted, finally turning his head just enough to glance at me, his eyes sharp and cold for a moment before returning to the window. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady when I asked, "Do you know where this bus is going?" He smiled, a quick, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Wherever it needs to," he said softly. The bus driver's silence, the man's presence, the empty seats, everything felt like threads pulling tighter around me. I was trapped between two dangers, and no one else seemed to notice. The night stretched on, and the bus kept moving, deeper into the dark. I realized then that this ride home wasn't going to end the way I expected. The flickering overhead light cast long shadows across the stained fabric of the seats, making the empty rows look like silent witnesses to a story I wasn't meant to hear. My fingers curled tighter around the handle of my bag, knuckles white, as I glanced again at the man. He hadn't moved, but the way his eyes fixed on the window, unblinking, distant, made it clear he was watching for something, or someone. I debated whether to change seats, but the bus was nearly deserted, and moving might draw unwanted attention. Instead, I settled back, trying to steady my breathing, willing my heart not to betray me. The hum of the engine was the only sound, rhythmic and relentless, like a countdown. Outside, the streetlights thinned out, replaced by towering shadows of trees and the occasional flicker of distant houses. This wasn't the path to my neighborhood. A sudden jolt shook the bus as it swerved sharply onto a narrow, unlit road. My stomach dropped. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel, but his silence was unnerving. I caught a glimpse of his profile in the rearview mirror, jaw clenched, eyes hard behind thick glasses. He wasn't just a driver, he was part of whatever this was. The man beside me shifted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should have gotten off when you could." His words hung between us, heavy and cold. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Why? What do you want from me?" He laughed softly, a sound that felt more like a threat than amusement. "Not what I want. What the others want. You've seen too much, heard the wrong things. This ride isn't about destinations, it's about erasing traces." Panic surged, but so did a stubborn flicker of defiance. If this was a trap, I wouldn't go down without trying to fight. I scanned the bus again, emergency exits, windows, anything that could be a way out. The nearest window was cracked open, just enough for a desperate hand to squeeze through. The man's smile widened, sensing my thoughts. "Don't bother. The roads are watched, the exits locked. You're not leaving this bus until the end of the line." My throat tightened. The night outside deepened, swallowing the bus whole. Somewhere ahead, the unknown waited. And so did I. The bus rolled on, the tires humming steadily against the asphalt, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I forced myself to look at the man again, trying to read his face for any hint of hesitation or weakness. But his eyes were cold, unyielding, like a predator sizing up its prey. "What do you mean by the others?" I asked, voice low but steady. "Who are they?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned a little closer, his breath faint but smelling faintly of tobacco and something metallic. "You're not the only one who's noticed," he said. "For weeks now, I've been riding this route, watching. There are more eyes than you think, and none of them belong to the people you trust." A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to protest, to ask who he meant, but I knew it was pointless. The bus was a moving cage, the driver a silent sentinel, and the man beside me a reminder that whatever was happening, it was far bigger than me. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Why me? What have I done?" He shrugged, but the motion was slow, deliberate, like a man weighing his words. "You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place, if you want to see how deep this goes." He glanced toward the front of the bus, where the driver's profile was still visible in the mirror. "That man up there is part of it. He's silent because that's his role. But he's not the one calling the shots." The bus curved again, the headlights slicing through the darkness. I looked out the window and saw nothing but empty fields and the occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse. No other vehicles. No way to flag down help. My throat tightened. I was completely alone, or so it seemed. I wanted to ask the driver directly, but every time I tried to catch his eye in the mirror, he avoided me. The only communication was his steady grip on the steering wheel and the occasional glance at the GPS screen mounted beside him. It showed a route that made no sense, a deliberate detour into areas I'd never seen on my usual ride home. I shifted slightly, careful not to draw the man's attention. My fingers grazed the edge of my phone in my pocket, and I realized with a jolt that I hadn't checked for signal since the bus left the main road. Pulling it out, I glanced at the screen. No bars. Nothing. It was as if the night itself had swallowed the signal whole. The man beside me leaned back, folding his arms. "They don't want you to call for help," he said flatly. "Not until it's too late." I swallowed hard and forced my mind to focus. If I couldn't call for help, I had to find another way. I studied the bus again, emergency exit signs, windows that might open wider, even the small maintenance panel near the driver's seat that I'd noticed earlier. Could I reach it? Could I open the door? The man caught my gaze and smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Don't waste your energy. Every exit is locked. Every window sealed. You're trapped." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I thought of the other passengers, or rather, the lack of them. The bus had been nearly empty when I boarded, and now, save for the driver and this man, I was alone. No one else to witness what was happening. No one to intervene. Then, almost without thinking, I reached into my bag and pulled out the small notebook I'd been carrying. It was a habit I'd picked up, jotting down odd details during my commutes, little things that felt off. Over the past few weeks, I'd noticed the same man at different stops, always appearing at odd times, always watching. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now it seemed like a trail of breadcrumbs leading me right into danger. Flipping through the pages, I found the sketches and notes, the man's face, the times he appeared, the stops he lingered near. The pattern was clear. He wasn't random. He was deliberate. I looked up, hoping for some kind of reaction from the driver, but he was still focused ahead, expression unreadable. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked the man. "If you're part of it, why warn me?" His eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like regret. "Because I'm not the enemy," he said softly. "Not yet. But if you don't get off this bus, someone else will be." Before I could ask who, the bus jolted again, this time harder, throwing me forward against the seatbelt. The lights flickered, and through the window, I glimpsed a figure standing by the roadside, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Pale and still, watching. The man beside me tensed. "They're here," he whispered. "And they don't like surprises." I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The road ahead disappeared into a wall of trees, darkness pressing in on every side. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. The bus slowed, then stopped. The engine's hum died, leaving nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant rustle of leaves. The driver turned slowly in his seat to face me, his eyes unreadable behind the thick lenses. And then, the silence shattered with a sharp knock on the door. I froze, trapped between the man beside me, the silent driver, and the unknown waiting just outside. The ride wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The knock came again, louder this time, deliberate, too deliberate to be anything casual. "Who is it?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the sudden silence that had replaced the engine's hum. The man glanced toward the door, then back at me. "Not who," he said. "What?" I frowned, heart still hammering. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the driver's voice cracked through the stillness, low and cautious. "You don't want to open that door." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the door, then back to the man. "Then why are we stopped here? Why didn't you just keep driving?" The driver's eyes flicked toward the door again, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something's wrong up ahead. Road's blocked. This isn't just a stop. It's a trap. My breath caught. A trap. The word echoed in my mind as I tried to piece together everything: the man who'd been stalking the route, the driver's silence, the figure outside. None of it added up to anything good. I have to get off, I said, more to myself than anyone else. The man beside me shook his head, urgency flashing in his eyes. If you do, you'll be alone out there. It's not safe. I swallowed hard. Alone or not, staying here felt worse. The bus, the driver, the man next to me, they were all part of this strange, suffocating web. But stepping outside meant facing the unknown figure waiting in the dark. Another knock, this time a series of quick raps, made me jump. The driver rose slowly from his seat, his movements stiff and deliberate. He reached for the door handle, hesitated, then pulled it open just enough to peer outside. I followed his gaze, and my stomach turned. The figure was closer now, a shadow blending into the trees but unmistakably human. The pale face was expressionless, eyes fixed on the bus like a predator sizing up its prey. The driver shut the door abruptly and locked it with a metallic click. "We're not the only ones who know this road," he muttered. "Someone's been waiting for us." The man beside me leaned in, voice barely above a breath. "This isn't random. They've been watching us, tracking this route as much as I have." "What do you mean?" I asked, heart pounding. He hesitated, then pulled the notebook from my hands, flipping to a page covered in scribbles and rough maps. "Look here," he said, pointing to a series of marks along the bus route. "These aren't just stops. They're checkpoints, places where they expect us to slow down, to be vulnerable." I stared, the pattern becoming clear. Each checkpoint corresponded to a spot where I'd noticed something off, a flicker of movement in the shadows, a strange figure lingering just out of sight. The man beside me had been right all along. "They're controlling the route," he said grimly. "And now we're caught in the middle." Fear twisted in my gut. The bus was surrounded, trapped between those watching from the trees and the driver who wasn't helping. I looked to the driver, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why won't you help me? Who are you protecting?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and he turned back to the wheel. The bus rumbled to life, but instead of moving forward, it reversed slowly, back toward the last stop. The man beside me cursed under his breath. "They're hurting us. Trying to keep us where they can control us." I clenched my fists, the notebook heavy in my lap. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about surviving whatever game these people were playing when I hadn't even realized I was part of. As the bus backed up, the door opened again, this time from the inside. The driver gestured for me to stand. "Come with me," he said, voice low and commanding. The man next to me grabbed my arm. "Don't trust him." But the driver was already moving toward the front, and the bus was no longer a refuge. It was a trap closing in. I had to decide, stay with the man who claimed he wasn't the enemy, or follow the driver into the unknown. And as I stood, heart racing, I realized there was no going back. The ride was far from over. I took a deep breath and let instinct guide me. I slipped from the man's grasp before he could tighten his hold and step toward the driver. The bus hummed softly beneath my feet, the dim overhead lights flickering as the engine idled. We moved down the aisle in silence, the passengers' eyes following us like shadows, some wide with fear, others resigned to whatever fate awaited. At the front, the driver pulled open a small door beside the wheel. Beyond it, a narrow stairwell led downward into darkness. "This way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with urgency. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before descending. The air grew colder, damp, and thick with the scent of oil and rust. Flickering bulbs lined the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with every step. Somewhere deep beneath the bus, the world above felt impossibly distant. As I reached the bottom, a faint glow caught my eye, a room cluttered with monitors and tangled cables, screens displaying grainy images from cameras I hadn't noticed before. The driver shut the door behind me and finally spoke, his tone softer but no less intense. "You don't know what's coming," he said. "But down here, we might stand a chance." Before I could respond, a crackle from one of the radios pierced the silence. Static gave way to hurried voices, urgent, alarmed. The bus trembled slightly, as if reacting to the news. "We've been found," the driver muttered, eyes narrowing. "They're closer than we thought." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of decisions yet to be made. There was no turning back. Not now. Whatever lay ahead, I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The monitors flickered, casting a sickly green light over the driver's face. "We've been found," the driver repeated, voice low but steady. "They're closer than we thought." I swallowed hard, trying to steady the rising tide of dread that was curling in my stomach. Closer. Whoever was after us wasn't just some distant shadow anymore. They were here, hunting, right beneath the bus. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, eyes flicking to a grainy feed on one of the screens. "The man. The one who's been following your route. We thought he was just a stray, someone to ignore. But he's organized. Patient. Dangerous." The words hit me like a punch. That unsettling man, quiet, watching, always just out of reach, was no random passenger. He was a predator. And the driver, for all his cryptic warnings, was the only person who seemed to know how deep the danger ran. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I demanded, heart pounding. The driver's gaze was grim. "Because it wasn't safe. Because you might not believe me. And because the bus, well, it's not just a bus anymore. It's a trap, a fortress, and a cage all at once." I looked around the cramped room, the cables snaking across the floor like veins, the screen showing every corner of the bus and the surrounding streets. The other passengers, their faces pale and drawn, pressed close to the windows, eyes wide but silent. No one else seemed to notice the danger, or maybe they were too scared to act. "Where is he now?" I asked, voice shaking. The driver pointed to a monitor showing an empty bus stop just a block away. A shadow moved just beyond the lamp post, too dark to make out details but unmistakably human. "He's waiting. Watching." A sudden noise from above, the dull thud of footsteps on metal, made us both jump. The driver cursed under his breath and grabbed a small flashlight. "He's coming inside." I backed away from the console, heart hammering. The room felt like a tomb, the stale air thick with fear. The driver moved quickly, opening a hatch that led to a narrow crawl space. "If he gets down here, we're done," he said. "You need to hide." "Where?" I asked, panic tightening my chest. He pointed to a small metal locker tucked beneath the console. "In there. Stay quiet. Stay still." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I slid into the cramped space, the metal cold against my skin, the darkness pressing in. Outside, I could hear the driver's whispered curses and the heavy steps of someone moving cautiously down the stairwell. The locker door swung shut, and I was alone with my breath, the pounding of my heart, and the faint sound of a voice, low, calm, and terrifyingly close. "You don't have to do this," the man said, voice smooth as silk. "Just come out, and no one gets hurt." The driver's reply was a low growl, the sudden sound of something heavy hitting metal. Then silence. For a moment, I thought the world had stopped. Then the locker door rattled. I pressed my back harder against the cold steel, fingers clutching the edges of the door. The man's voice drifted closer, almost a whisper now. "I know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it has to be." My breath caught, and I realized the driver wasn't moving. The footsteps above had stopped. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I had no idea how long I stayed there, trapped in darkness, but when the locker door finally creaked open, it wasn't the man's face I saw. It was the driver, his eyes wild, a fresh cut bleeding down his cheek. "We don't have time," he hissed. "He's coming back, and he's not alone." Before I could ask what he meant, the bus jolted violently, lights flickering out. The monitors went dead. The hum of the engine stuttered, and all at once, the bus was plunged into darkness. I heard the man's voice again, closer this time, laughing softly in the black. "We're going to finish this ride together." A cold sweat prickled down my spine as the emergency lights sputtered on, casting a sickly red glow over the cramped interior. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale. Outside, shadows seemed to twist and writhe, crawling up the windows like living things. I glanced toward the back of the bus, heart pounding. That soft, eerie laughter echoed again, bouncing off the metal walls, an invisible presence stalking us all. Suddenly, the bus lurched sharply to the side, throwing me against the seat. The driver cursed under his breath, struggling to keep control as the road outside vanished into darkness. Through the smeared glass, I caught a glimpse of figures emerging from the fog, tall, distorted shapes that moved impossibly fast, their eyes glowing faintly like embers. Panic surged through the passengers, whispers turned to frantic murmurs, fear rippling like electricity. "Stay calm," the driver barked, voice strained. "We're almost through this." But his words rang hollow. The air thickened, charged with something ancient and wrong. I fumbled for my phone, no signal. No way out. Then, from the shadows, a low growl rolled forward, deep and guttural. The laughter stopped. Silence pressed in, heavier than before. Something was inside the bus now, something that didn't want us to survive the ride. I swallowed hard, realizing this was far from over. The real nightmare was just beginning. The morning light fell through the cracked windows in soft, pale beams, painting the bus interior in a muted glow that made the grime and chaos all the more vivid. I was still strapped into my seat, the seatbelt pressed uncomfortably into my side, but the tension had drained from my limbs. Around me, the other passengers stirred, faces pale, eyes wide and haunted. The driver sat slumped over the wheel, breathing shallow but alive. The man, the one who had been stalking the route, was nowhere to be seen. The strange, suffocating dread that had gripped us all seemed to have lifted, leaving a fragile calm in its wake. It was over. Or so I told myself. The memory of the night's terror clung stubbornly, a weight pressing on my chest. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to piece together how it had ended. The last clear moment I recalled was the driver, wounded, desperate, dragging me into the storage locker to hide. Then the bus had lurched and gone dark, the laughter echoing, the growl that didn't belong to any animal I knew. And then silence. But the silence had been a trap, a final act in a terrifying play. I glanced around, eyes settling on the driver. His face was pale, but the wildness in his eyes had softened. He looked at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he spoke without that edge of panic. "We made it," he said quietly, voice rough. "It's over." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of those glowing eyes and that laughter kept me from fully relaxing. "What was that?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He shook his head, swallowing hard. "I don't know. I thought maybe someone was messing with the bus, some gang or something, but none of it made sense. The way the lights went out, the noises, it was like they wanted us to be terrified. But when I fought back, When I locked you away, I think I scared him off. Who? I pressed. The man? He nodded grimly. Yeah. I think he was the one stalking her out all this time. Watching, waiting. He knew the bus better than I did. I think he wanted to trap us all here, but once I caught him trying to get inside, he backed off. I swallowed, my throat dry. Why? Why me? Why the bus? The driver's eyes met mine, tired but resolute. Because you were the only one who noticed. The only one who tried to stop it. Everyone else just looked away. It felt like a slap of cold water. Everyone else had been blind, or worse, willfully ignorant. I had been the one paying attention, the one who felt the unease gnawing at the edges of every late-night ride. But that awareness had painted a target on my back. I looked down at my hands, trembling slightly. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was growing. Anger, yes, but also a fierce clarity. I wasn't going to be a victim. The driver started the bus again, the engine rumbling to life. Outside, the fog was lifting, the world slowly coming back into focus. We were moving forward, away from the nightmare. As the bus rolled toward the next stop, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning, I found a woman from the back, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up. We didn't see it, but you did. You saved us." Her words felt like a bomb, and I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Maybe I had been scared, but I hadn't been alone. Not entirely. When the bus finally pulled into the depot, the driver and I were the last to step off. The police were waiting, alerted by calls from concerned citizens who'd noticed the bus hadn't arrived on schedule. I told everything about the man, the stalking, the blackout, the growl, the laughter. The officers took notes, exchanged glances, and promised to look into it. But I knew some things wouldn't be so easily explained away. Weeks later, the route was temporarily suspended while the company conducted investigations. I avoided the bus stops for a time, choosing instead to walk home or catch a taxi. The fear lingered, but it no longer ruled me. I started going to therapy, unraveling the threads of anxiety and trauma that had woven themselves into my days. I learned to breathe again, to trust my senses without letting them consume me. I realized that the horror of that night wasn't just in the man or the strange sounds, it was in what we all allowed to happen when we looked the other way. I began speaking out, writing about what I'd experienced, warning others to stay alert, to trust their instincts. The bus route became a symbol not just of fear, but of resilience. The driver and I kept in touch, bound by the shared nightmare. He told me he was seeking help too, haunted by the thought that his silence might have cost lives. Together, we found some measure of peace in knowing we had fought back. On a quiet evening, months later, I walked past the bus depot. A new bus rolled out, its bright lights cutting through the dusk. I felt a flicker of something fierce and unyielding inside me. I was no longer just a passenger on that ride. I was a witness, a survivor, and I would never be invisible again. That night, beneath the soft glow of street lamps, I vowed to speak out, to turn our pain into purpose and reclaim the silence that nearly consumed us. Story 5, Vanishing at Hollow Lake, Echoes of the Lost. I had always found comfort in the quiet spaces, the kind where the noise of the world falls away and all that remains is the steady pulse of nature. The drive out was long and winding, the roads narrowing until they were little more than dirt tracks. I parked my car near a ragged trailhead, grabbed my pack, and set out with the sun still high. The forest was dense, towering pines and maples crowding in so that the air smelled of earth and resin. The path was uneven but well-trodden, and after a couple of hours, I emerged on the edge of the lake. It was smaller than I expected, a quiet pool of dark water cupped by steep, mossy banks and scattered boulders. The surface was glassy and still, reflecting the late afternoon sky. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground near the shore, careful to keep a respectful distance from the water. There was something calming about the place, a softness to the light and a hush that wrapped around me like a blanket. After unpacking, I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The flames crackled, sending tiny sparks into the cooling air. Birds flitted through the trees, calling to one another as they settled in for the evening. It felt good to be alone, away from the constant hum of city life, from the screens and the endless barrage of news and noise. As twilight deepened, I sat by the fire, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The sky shifted from pink to a deep indigo, stars beginning to prick through the darkening canopy. The lake was a mirror now, the trees standing like silent sentinels at its edge. That's when I first heard it. A faint sound, carried on the breeze from somewhere over the water. It was a cry, a voice, maybe soft and broken. At first, I thought it might be an animal, a distant bird or a call lost in the rustling leaves. But it didn't sound quite right. It was a human sound, a plea for help whispered across the lake. I froze, every nerve alert. The firelight flickered against the trees as I strained to listen. The cries came again, just one, then another, faint and urgent. I scanned the water's edge with my flashlight, the beam sweeping over tangled roots and dark shadows. Nothing moved except the gentle ripple of the lake. I told myself it was probably someone else camping nearby, maybe a late-night swimmer or an injured hiker calling out. But as the minutes passed, the uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The cries didn't come from the shore. They seemed to drift across the water, distant and unreachable. The forest was supposed to be safe, or at least neutral. It was just trees and water. But the sound carried a weight, like a small thread unraveling something I hadn't noticed before. I leaned back against a log, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The local ranger's pamphlet I'd picked up on the drive out came to mind. There was a brief mention, buried between standard warnings about wildlife and weather, that anyone who got lost around this lake often vanished without a trace. The water was deceptively calm but known for deadly undercurrents beneath the surface, swallowing anything that drifted too far. Search teams had come and gone, sometimes finding nothing, no bodies, no clues. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Part of me wondered if I should call it a night, pack up, and head back before darkness deepened. But the campsite was warm, the fire still crackling softly, and the thought of walking alone in the dark along the narrow trail felt worse. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The cries came again, just beyond the reach of the firelight, carried by the cool night air. A voice, maybe a woman's, trembling with fear or pain. Or maybe desperation. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, deciding to investigate the shoreline just a little further. The beam cut through the darkness, tracing the edge of the lake where the water kissed the roots and moss. The night was alive with sounds, the soft slap of water against rock, the distant call of an owl, but no other sign of human presence. And then I noticed something else. Near the water's edge, half hidden by brush, were footprints. Barefoot, small, pressed into the damp earth. They led away from the lake and vanished into the shadowed trees. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding louder than the night around me. Whoever had been here wasn't far. And the cries, those faint, desperate calls, were no accident. I was alone in the wilderness. But I wasn't the only one out here. The lake was still, mocking in its calmness, but beneath that surface, something was stirring. Something that didn't want to be found. I knew then I wasn't just a visitor. I was part of something else now, something far darker than the stillness of the forest or the quiet water. And it was only the beginning. My heart hammered as I stepped closer to the shore, the wet earth sinking slightly beneath my boots. The cries had ceased, leaving a suffocating silence that pressed in from every direction. Shadows shifted between the trees, subtle and deliberate, as if watching, waiting. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam trembling with my unsteady hands. Whatever lurked here thrived in the dark, feeding on fear and silence alike. There was no turning back now. I had crossed into their world. I didn't sleep much that night. Morning light came slow through the dense canopy, painting the lake a pale gray. The air was cool and damp, thick with the scent of wet pine and earth. I sat by the fire, shoving the last piece of log into the coals, trying to steady my nerves. The footprints, small, barefoot, and vanishing into the forest, gnawed at me. Who were they? And why had they been here, so close to my camp? I decided to follow the trail. If someone had passed this way recently, maybe I could find answers before night returned with its terrors. I packed lightly, only essentials, and slipped my flashlight and a knife into my jacket pocket. The forest was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, like it was watching me back. The footprints led away from the lake along a narrow, overgrown path barely wide enough for one person. The earth was soft from recent rain, and the prints appeared fresh, edges sharp and clear. As I walked, I scanned the ground for more signs, broken branches, discarded items, anything that might tell a story. A few yards in, I spotted what looked like scraps of fabric snagged on a low branch, threadbare, faded blue. I pulled it free, my fingers trembling, and folded it carefully into my pocket. The trail curved deeper into the woods, shadows thickening beneath the towering pines. I caught a glimpse of movement, something slipping between the trees, but when I raised my flashlight, nothing was there. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a jay. I told myself I was imagining things. I had to be. After nearly an hour, the path opened into a small clearing. The ground was disturbed footprints, yes, but also marks that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Deep gouges in the dirt, as if someone had struggled to free themselves or been dragged. A faint stain darkened the earth near a cluster of rocks, too dark and irregular to be water. My stomach twisted. I crouched down, shining my light closer. It wasn't just dirt, there were flecks of something red, scattered like dry petals. Blood. I swallowed hard, the reality settling like a stone in my gut. Someone had been hurt here, maybe badly. Suddenly, a crack broke the silence. I whipped around, heart pounding, but only saw a squirrel darting up a tree. Still, the sense of being watched intensified. This place was alive with unseen eyes. I decided to head back, thoughts racing. Who was out here? Were they lost? Or worse, were they running from someone? The local ranger's warnings echoed in my mind. People disappear here all the time, swallowed by the lake's undercurrents, or worse, by something human lurking in the shadows. Back at the camp, I took out my phone, hoping for a signal. Nothing. Just the spinning wheel of frustration. I couldn't call for help, and even if I could, would anyone believe me? The stories were always dismissed as local folklore until someone went missing. I sat beside the lake, watching the water's surface ripple under the morning breeze. The peacefulness was deceptive. I thought I had come here for solitude, to escape the noise of the world. But the silence around this place was a different kind of noise, a warning I was only beginning to understand. Later that afternoon, I packed a small bag and set out toward the ranger station, a few miles down the forest road. The station was a weathered cabin surrounded by a clutter of signs, maps, and equipment. Inside, I found a man in his 50s with sun-leathered skin and tired eyes. His name was Tom, one of the local search team leaders. I told him about the cries, the footprints, the bloodstains. He listened carefully, his expression darkening. "You're not the first to hear those calls," he said quietly. "People come here, alone or in groups, and sometimes they hear voices on the water at night. It's almost always someone in trouble. Have you found anyone? I asked. Tom shook his head. No bodies, no survivors. Just disappearances. The lake's currents are tricky underwater channels that catch even strong swimmers. But that's not all. There's something else out here, something we don't talk about much. I leaned forward. What do you mean? He glanced toward the window, then lowered his voice. There have been reports, strange figures moving through the woods at night. Tracks that don't match any known animals. And sometimes, evidence that someone's been held captive or worse. Some people believe it's just poachers or criminals hiding out. Others think there's a more dangerous presence. Have you ever found anyone alive? Tom's eyes darkened further. No. Not in years. The missing just vanish. He paused, then added, if you're going to stay near the lake, you need to be careful. Don't trust the silence. It's not empty out here. I left the ranger station with a weight settling over me, heavier than the backpack on my shoulders. Tom's words confirmed my fears. There was something human, something dangerous, lurking in the shadows beyond the lake's calm surface. That night, I returned to my campsite, but sleep was impossible. The cries returned, louder this time, closer. A woman's voice, trembling and raw, slicing through the night. I scrambled to my feet, flashlight in hand, heart racing. I followed the sound to the far edge of the lake where the water met a dense thicket of alder and birch. The voice was clearer now. Help me, please, someone, then suddenly cut off, as if silenced. I scanned the shoreline, the beam catching wet footprints leading into the thicket. Then I noticed something chilling, a tangled mess of branches and leaves, disturbed as if something had been dragged through. My breath caught. I wasn't alone. Someone or something was out there, moving in the dark, watching me as I watched the lake. And then, from the water, a splash. Not the gentle ripple of fish or wind, but a sudden, violent disturbance that sent ripples racing across the surface. I shone the light toward the sound, but the lake held its secrets, smooth and unreadable as ever. The night pressed in closer, and I realized the truth. I wasn't just a witness to these disappearances. I was in their path now. Something was waiting beneath the surface, in the woods, in the silence. And it wasn't going to let me leave. I had to find out what. But at what cost? The morning sun broke through the trees with a weak, watery light, filtering down in thin shafts that did little to warm the chill lingering from the night. Tom's warning echoed in my mind. Don't trust the silence. It's not empty out here. I wasn't sure if I was foolhardy or desperate, but I had to know what was happening. That night's events had changed everything. No longer was I just a curious camper. I was a potential target. The forest around me was alive with birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves, but the peace felt brittle, like it could shatter at any moment. I packed up my gear slowly, methodically, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. But the footprints, the wet prints leading into the thicket, and the splash in the water haunted me. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just playing tricks with the wind. Before I left the camp, I decided to head back to the ranger station. I needed to talk to Tom again. I'd spent the night chasing shadows and voices. Now, I needed facts, something solid to hold on to. The ranger station was a half-mile hike through dense woods, along a barely marked trail that twisted and turned like a snake. I moved steadily, the forest closing in around me. The air smelled sharp and earthy, full of pine and damp leaves. Birds flitted between branches, and a squirrel darted across the path, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I reached the station, Tom was outside, checking over some equipment. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Back so soon?" he asked, voice low. I heard the voice again, I said. Last night. A woman. It was real. Tom's face tightened. He nodded slowly, then gestured toward the back of the building. Come inside. The station was small, cramped with maps, radios, and survival gear. Tom sat me down at a cluttered desk and pulled out a folder thick with yellowing papers. These are reports from the last 5 years, he said. Disappearances, mostly hikers and campers around the lake. No bodies, no clues, just people gone without a trace. I skimmed through the entries. Names, dates, locations. Each case ended with the same grim note, no evidence found. Search called off. Any patterns? I asked. Tom nodded, tapping the folder. Mostly young people, traveling alone or in small groups. They disappear near the water's edge or in the thick forest. Some witnesses reported hearing cries or seeing shadows moving between the trees. That sounds like what I experienced, I said. Tom's eyes darkened. Exactly. Which is why I told you to be careful. The ones responsible know the area and they're patient. They wait until night, when the forest swallows sound. I frowned. Responsible? You mean people? Yes, he said grimly. Poachers, smugglers, or worse. There's been talk of a group using the lake's isolation to hide their operations. No one knows exactly who, but they're ruthless. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a wilderness mystery. It was something deeply human and far more dangerous. Have you ever found any evidence? I asked. Tom hesitated, then pulled out a faded photograph from the folder. The image was grainy, black and white, a torn piece of torn fabric snagged on a branch. This was found near the last known location of a missing woman. It's the only physical clue we've ever recovered. I stared at it, imagining the desperate struggle it represented. What about the splash I heard last night? I asked. Could it have been someone thrown into the lake? Tom shook his head. The lake's currents can pull things under fast. Anyone thrown in won't come up again. It's like the water swallows them whole. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. I spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, extra batteries, a first aid kit, rope, and mapping out the shoreline more carefully. I couldn't ignore the calls for help anymore, no matter how chilling. As evening fell, I returned to the lake, the air growing colder, shadows lengthening like dark fingers across the ground. I set up my camp again, this time closer to the edge of the water, near the spot where I'd heard the voice. Night came quickly, swallowing the world in black. Around midnight, the cries began again, faint, desperate, unmistakably human. Help, please. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, heart hammering. This time, the voice was clearer, closer to the water's edge. I moved carefully, eyes scanning the shoreline. Then I saw it, something half buried in the mud near a cluster of reeds. I knelt down, shining the light on the shape. It was a small canvas bag, soaked and torn, but inside, there was something that made my breath catch. A set of keys. A cell phone, cracked but intact. And a folded piece of paper. Hands trembling, I opened the note. It wasn't just a hastily scribbled message, it was a map, hand-drawn, marking a path through the forest, with a single word scrawled beneath, safe. My mind raced. Who had left this here? Were they still alive? And what did the question mean? Suddenly, a noise behind me, footsteps crunching on leaves, slow and deliberate. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but the forest held only shadows. Then, a voice, low and cold, barely more than a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." Frozen, I realized the nightmare wasn't just beneath the water or in the lost voices. It was here, watching me. Waiting. And this time, it wasn't going to let me walk away. The night air was sharper than I expected, the cold seeping through my jacket as I stood frozen near the reeds, the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, but the sudden weight in my chest made each inhale feel like I was dragging water into my lungs. I turned slowly, the beam of light sweeping across the trees, over the thick trunks and tangled underbrush. Nothing. No figure, no movement, just the indifferent forest swallowing sound and light alike. "Show yourself," I managed, my voice rough. I tried to sound braver than I felt, but I wasn't sure it worked. Silence answered me, thick and heavy. Then, softly, too soft to be anything but deliberate, a twig snapped somewhere off to my right. The sound was a feather's weight, but it shook the ground beneath me. I took a step back, heart hammering in my ears, eyes darting through the darkness. The map, the keys, the phone, everything was in my pocket, but I couldn't focus on them. My mind was a jumble of fear and confusion. Who was this person? What did they want? "Why are you here?" The voice came again, now a whisper just beyond the reach of my light. "You don't belong." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I heard someone calling, "Help." "I found this," I said, pulling the note from my pocket and unfolding it, the crackling paper almost a betrayal in the silence. "I'm trying to figure out what happened." A rustle from the shadows, closer now, so close I could feel the subtle shift in the air. My feet instinctively moved backward until I felt the rough bark of a tree at my back. I was trapped. "People come here looking for answers," the voice said, and this time it was colder, sharper. "But the lake doesn't give them back. And neither do we." The words hit me like a punch. "Who's we?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. There was no reply, just the soft crunch of leaves and the faint drip of water from the reeds. Then, a figure emerged, stepping into the circle of my flashlight. A man, tall, lean, with eyes that glinted like broken glass under the beam. His face was familiar, somehow the kind of familiarity that didn't come with a name, but with a warning buried deep in your gut. "I'm Tom," I said quickly, trying to sound steady. "You talked to me yesterday, about the lake." He didn't smile. "I'm not Tom." His voice was low, gravelly. "But I know him. And I know what you're doing here." I swallowed again, realizing that any chance of peaceful conversation was gone. "I'm trying to help. Someone's out there. Someone's missing." He laughed then. Not a full laugh, more a dry exhale, like the sound of dead leaves skittering across the ground. "No one's missing here by accident," he said. "They come looking for something, money, revenge, answers, and the lake takes them. You heard the stories, right? People vanish without a trace." "Yeah," I said, gripping the flashlight tighter. "But I'm not going to let that happen." He stepped closer, and I saw the scar running down his cheek, half hidden in shadow. "You think you can fight it? You think you can save them? Nobody fights the lake." The weight of his words was suffocating. The map burned in my pocket, a silent demand to keep moving forward. But now there was something else, a warning, clear and chilling. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. "There are things here worse than the water. Things waiting in the dark, watching the shoreline." My heart pounded as I realized the full truth behind the missing people. This wasn't just about drowning or currents. There were people out here, patrolling the woods, hunting anyone who got too close. "Why tell me this?" I asked, voice barely steady. "Because you'll make a mistake," he said. "Because they're watching you now. And when they come, there's no hiding." I swallowed hard, stepping back toward the water's edge. The lake was still, its surface a mirror for the moonlight, but I could almost feel the tension pulsing beneath, the silent threat lurking just out of sight. "Who are they?" I demanded. He shrugged, like it was something too dark to name. "Local hunters. Not animals. People. They don't want anyone finding what's lost here. It's their way of keeping the lake quiet." My mind raced. The map, the note, the cries for help, they were pieces of a puzzle that was far bigger and darker than I'd imagined. Suddenly, a noise, sharp, deliberate footsteps breaking the silence from behind us. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness, but the man was gone. The footsteps came closer, faster now. My breath caught, and I realized I wasn't ready for this. Then the voice, low and deadly calm, whispered again, this time from all around me. "You shouldn't be here." I turned back to the lake, heart hammering, as movement broke the stillness on the far shore. Figures stepping out from the shadows, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. Men with faces like stone, hands gripping weapons that gleamed faintly. The undercurrents beneath the lake were nothing compared to what was waiting here, on the land. And I was trapped between them. I reached into my pocket, clutching the map and the phone, knowing that whatever I did next could decide whether I disappeared like the others or survived to tell the story. The night was no longer just cold. It was waiting, watching, hunting, and I had nowhere left to run. The first light of dawn was a thin, gray smear across the sky when I finally dared to move. I didn't know how long I had been freezing there, waiting, listening to the lake's deceptive calm. But as the pale light grew stronger, I realized something had shifted. The voices, the faint cries for help that had haunted the nights, were gone. The lake was silent in a way that felt heavier than before. I forced myself to stand, every muscle screaming after hours of stillness. My hands trembled as I checked my pockets. The map was still there, folded and worn, the phone dead but clutched tight like a lifeline. Slowly, I made my way back toward the campsite, keeping to the thick underbrush, avoiding the open shoreline where I'd seen the men emerge. The forest was eerily quiet, no birdsong, no rustling leaves, nothing to break the oppressive stillness. As I walked, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The missing people, the warnings from the search teams, the whispered threats. It wasn't just the lake's deadly currents I had to fear. It was the people who controlled this place, who made sure the lake kept its secrets. By mid-morning, I reached the edge of the campsite. The tent was still standing, the small fire pit cold and gray. I sank down beside it, exhaustion overwhelming me. I had to think, had to find a way out without drawing attention. The night had changed me. I wasn't the naive camper who had arrived with a sense of adventure and curiosity. I was someone who had stared into the darkness and come back. But I was also someone who knew the cost of that knowledge. I pulled out the map again, tracing the jagged lines with my finger. The note I'd found, scrawled and desperate, made sense now. The people who disappeared here didn't vanish by accident. They were hunted, silenced, swallowed by a conspiracy that thrived on fear and isolation. A sudden rustle nearby made me freeze. My heart jumped, but it was only a small squirrel darting through the leaves. Still, the moment reminded me how close danger could be, how every step needed to be careful, calculated. I packed what little I had left, my supplies were nearly gone, and started walking toward the trailhead marked on the map. I had to get out, had to find help, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed, and the forest slowly gave way to the rough dirt path that led back to civilization. I kept my eyes on the shadows, my ears strained for any sign of those men, but the forest grew quiet again, less hostile somehow in the daylight. When I finally reached the ranger station at the edge of the forest, relief washed over me like a wave. The woman behind the desk looked up with tired eyes when I stepped inside. I'm here, I said, voice raw. I need to report what's happening at the lake. The disappearances, the men in the woods. She held up a hand, cutting me off gently. We know. We've been trying to keep people out for months now. The search teams, well, some of them never came back. It's why there's a warning sign at the entrance, but people still come. I swallowed hard. Why? Why keep it a secret? She looked away, her expression guarded. Because if word got out, it would ruin everything. The lake means money for some, and power for others. Those men you saw, they protect that. No one wants to risk losing what they have. The reality hit me with a cold clarity. The horror wasn't just the lake or the currents. It was the people, greedy, ruthless, who thrived on the fear and silence. But what about the missing people? I pressed. Their families deserve answers. She sighed, nodding slowly. We do what we can. But sometimes, the truth is too dangerous. You did well to get out. I left the station with a heavy heart, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't stay silent. These people needed to be exposed, even if it meant putting myself at risk. Days later, I found myself in front of a local news outlet, recounting everything I had seen and heard. The story was met with skepticism, but it sparked an investigation that slowly peeled back the layers of deception. The lake remained a place of quiet menace, and the current still claimed those who wandered too close. But the men in the shadows found it harder to operate under the growing light. As for me, the experience changed something deep inside. I came seeking solitude and adventure and found something far darker. I learned that evil doesn't always come from monsters beneath the water. It often walks on two legs, guarding its secrets with cold, unyielding hands. I never returned to that lake, but sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I can still hear those faint cries for help carried across the water. And I know there are others out there, caught in the currents of silence and fear, waiting for someone to find them. I tell their story now, not as a warning, but as a promise. That even in the darkest places, truth has a way of surfacing. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to keep fighting, even when the night seems endless. Because in the end, it's our voices that break the silence and our courage that lights the way forward, no matter how far. Story 6, Silent Pursuer on the Trail, Stalked in the Mountains. The morning air was sharp, colder than I'd expected for early September, but the sky was clear, a bright, cloudless blue that promised a good day for hiking. The first few hundred yards were easy, almost too easy. The path was well-worn, soft with pine needles and shaded by towering trees that filtered the sunlight into mottled patterns. I kept my pace steady, breathing in the scent of damp earth and resin. A small chipmunk darted across the trail a few feet ahead, its tiny feet pattering almost silently on the ground. I smiled to myself. This was exactly what I'd needed, a break from the noise, the endless hum of cars and people. I let my mind drift as I walked, thinking about the week ahead. Work was going to be a mess, I knew, but for now, none of that mattered. Up here, there was only the trail and the quiet, the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. About a mile in, the trail narrowed and started to climb more steeply. I slowed my pace, careful with each step as the incline bit into my calves. The forest thickened here, the trees close enough that their branches tangled overhead. It was cooler, darker beneath the canopy, and I liked the feeling of being swallowed by the woods. That's when I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe another hiker somewhere far off the trail. But the sound was too close, too deliberate. Crunch. 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 I stopped and turned around, scanning the trees. Nothing. The forest was empty, save for the occasional flicker of movement far above in the branches. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal moving through the underbrush. But the steps continued, matching my pace perfectly. I started walking again, slow and steady, listening hard. The footsteps were there, just beyond the edge of my hearing, staying in time with mine. I stopped again, heart quickening. The trail behind me was empty. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was an echo, or the way sound bounced between the trees. I picked up my pace, stepping faster, but the footsteps kept up, matching me step for step. The unease settled in my chest like a stone. I debated turning around, but the thought of looking into empty woods that held those footsteps made me hesitate. Instead, I kept moving forward, eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of life. Then, just as the trail curved around a large outcrop of granite, I caught sight of him. He was standing off the path, partially hidden behind a twisted pine, his lean frame hunched and ragged. His clothes were a patchwork of dirt and worn fabric, and his hair was wild, tangled in knots. But it was his eyes that struck me most, wide, unblinking, a pale gray that seemed to pierce right through the trees. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just watched, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. For a moment, I froze, a cold wave of something like fear washing over me. I wanted to step back, to turn and run, but my legs felt rooted. The trail behind me was still empty, but I knew now that the footsteps hadn't been imagination. They belonged to him. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and strange in the heavy silence. Still no answer. Just those eyes, fixed on me, unblinking. I took a shaky step forward, then another, forcing myself to move past the tree he'd been hiding behind. He didn't follow. He didn't flinch. When I looked back once more, he was gone. But the footsteps, those damned footsteps, had started again, keeping pace just behind me. I told myself it was time to get off the mountain, to head back to the safety of the trailhead and the busy road beyond. But even as I turned, the feeling lingered, a cold knot of something I couldn't name tightening in my gut. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a simple hike, a quiet day alone in the woods. Instead, I was being watched and followed. The trees closed in around me as I hurried down the trail, the footsteps never far behind. Panic prickled beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself that whoever or whatever was behind me had to be visible eventually. The forest was too open in places, and the fading light wouldn't hide a shadow for long. My eyes scanned the underbrush, catching glimmers of movement with each hurried step. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed from a thicket to my right. I froze, heart hammering, staring into the dimness. A figure stepped out, tall, lean, face obscured beneath a hood. My breath hitched. I debated running but knew the uneven ground would betray me. Instead, I held my ground, hands raised slightly to show I wasn't a threat. The figure paused, then said in a low, rough voice, "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced clear speech. "I'm just passing through. I don't want trouble." They studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly before stepping aside. "Keep to the main trail. It's not safe off the path after dark." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. As I resumed walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something far larger and far darker than I had expected. The next morning, I woke to a sky smeared with pale gray clouds, the kind that threatened rain but never quite delivered. I packed up slowly, checking every zipper and strap twice, my fingers trembling as if the cold had seeped into my bones. The forest around me was unnervingly quiet, no birdsong, no rustle of small animals. Only the soft sound of my own breathing and the faint crunch of my boots on the damp leaves. I tried to tell myself I'd imagine the footsteps, that the man was some local hermit who meant no real harm. But the truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I wasn't safe here. I retraced my steps to the main trail, keeping close to the well-worn path. The branches and undergrowth seemed sharper today, reaching out like skeletal fingers to snag at my sleeves and pack. I scanned the edges of the trail constantly, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Every crack of a twig or flutter of a bird's wing set my heart racing. About a mile in, I found something that made me stop dead, a crude shelter tucked beneath a cluster of large boulders. Branches and leaves had been woven into the form of a lean-to, barely sturdy but enough to shield someone from the worst of the elements. Nearby, a small fire pit scarred the earth, blackened stones arranged in a rough circle. Scattered around it were scraps of food, half-eaten fruit, a torn plastic wrapper, and a rusted metal can. I crouched down to examine the spot, my mind spinning. This was no casual hiker's campsite. It was a makeshift home, lived in for weeks, maybe months. And judging by the scraps, whoever had built it wasn't just passing through. They were staying here, watching, waiting. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around. Branches snapped, soft but deliberate. I peered into the dense brush but saw nothing. The footsteps from the day before echoed in my mind, and for a moment I thought I felt that cold presence again, just beyond the trees. I swallowed hard and kept moving, but my pace slowed. Every shadow felt alive. Then, as I rounded a bend in the trail, I spotted something else, a series of crude markings carved into the bark of a pine tree. Jagged lines and circles, almost like a code or message. I traced a finger over the grooves, my skin prickling. It was a warning, I was sure of it. Whoever had left these signs wanted to send a message, stay away. The air grew heavier, the forest seeming to close in around me. I debated turning back, but something urged me forward, a mix of fear and stubbornness. I needed to know more. If this man was still out here, living off the grid and watching the trail, I had to understand why. Was he dangerous? Was he alone? I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Nothing. Just the spinning wheel of frustration. No way to call for help. No way to tell anyone where I was. The isolation pressed down on me like a physical weight. Suddenly, a low sound caught my attention, a whisper of movement deeper in the woods. I froze, listening. It wasn't the rustle of leaves or the scurry of animals. It was deliberate, slow, and measured. Footsteps. Matching my own. I turned sharply, scanning the tree line. For a split second, I thought I caught a glimpse of a figure, a flash of pale skin, wild eyes reflecting the dim light. But when I blinked, it was gone. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe. Slowly, I backed away from the trail, intending to find a spot where I could hide and watch. If he was still here, I needed to see him clearly, to figure out what he wanted. I found a large fallen log camouflaged by ferns and crouched behind it, heart hammering. The forest was silent again, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the footsteps returned. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined everything, the underbrush to my left rustled. A pair of eyes met mine, gaunt, wild, and sharp as broken glass. He stepped forward slowly, hands empty but tense. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, voice rough and low, but this time with something more anger, maybe desperation. I met his gaze, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just passing through. I don't want trouble." His eyes narrowed. "This is my home. You don't belong here." The weight of those words settled over me. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a man who had retreated from the world, who saw me as an intruder in a place he'd claimed by force or necessity. And the footsteps, he had been following me all along, watching every move. I swallowed down the rising fear. I'll leave. I promise. He didn't respond immediately, just studied me for a long moment. Then, without a word, he slipped back into the shadows. As I stood there, the forest seemed to breathe around me, alive with secrets and silent threats. I knew I couldn't stay here, not like this. But turning back felt just as dangerous. Somewhere out there, the man was waiting, watching, stalking the very path I had to take. And I was running out of daylight. I forced my legs forward, each step heavier than the last. The trees closed in tighter, their twisted branches clawing at the fading light. Every rustle made my heart skip. Was it him, or just the wind? I couldn't tell anymore. The forest didn't sleep that night. Sleep came in short, uneasy bursts. Each time I woke, the moon was a sliver, casting pale light through the mesh. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, that the man had vanished into the night, leaving me alone on this remote mountain trail. But the silence was too complete, too deliberate. It felt like the forest held its breath, waiting. Morning came gray and cold. I packed up quickly, my fingers stiff from the chill. The trail stretched ahead, twisting through shadows and shafts of light. I should have turned back, retraced my steps, but something in me refused to quit. Not yet. I needed to understand who he was and why he was so determined to keep me out. I moved cautiously, every footfall a question mark. The underbrush was thick, the scent of pine and moss sharp in the air. My mind replayed our brief encounter, his hollow eyes, the warning in his voice, the way he disappeared like a ghost into the trees. I wondered if he lived alone because he wanted to or because he had no choice. The trail curved sharply, and I slowed, scanning the forest floor. Then, caught between the roots of a massive oak, I saw it, a crude trap, fashioned from wire and bent metal, half concealed under a bed of leaves. My heart jumped. This wasn't the work of a casual hiker or even a hunter. It was deliberate, designed to capture, or worse. I knelt beside it, examining the mechanism. The trap hadn't been sprung, but it was set tight, ready. Nearby, footprints pressed into the soft earth, barefoot, small, but unmistakably human. They led deeper into the woods, away from the main path. I swallowed hard, the image of the gaunt man flashing through my mind. Was this his way of defending his territory? Or was he hunting something or someone? The forest seemed to close in tighter as I followed the footprints. Branches scraped my arms, and the light dimmed under the thick canopy. The air grew cooler, heavier. After a few minutes, I reached a small clearing, and that's when I saw it, a makeshift camp, hidden beneath a canopy of branches and tarps, half camouflaged with moss and leaves. There were signs of life, charred wood from a fire pit, empty cans scattered near a roughly carved bench, and a tangle of clothes draped over a fallen log. My breath caught. This was where he lived. Where he had watched me, stalked me, waited. I stepped closer, heart hammering in my chest. On the ground, half buried in dirt and leaves, lay a worn journal, its cover cracked and stained. Almost without thinking, I picked it up. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with cramped handwriting. I flipped through, scanning fragments of sentences, names, dates, places. The entries spoke of isolation, fear, and a desperate need to disappear. But there was something else too, a growing paranoia, a conviction that the outside world was coming for him, hunting him down. One passage caught my eye. They follow. Always watching. I can't trust the trail anymore. I'm trapped in this silence, but it's safer here. Safer than the noise beyond. The handwriting trembled, the ink blotting as if the writer had been shaking with fear. I closed the journal and looked around the camp again. The man wasn't just a hermit. He was a prisoner of his own mind, haunted by something or someone from his past. A sudden noise shattered the stillness, a twig snapping nearby. I spun around, heart in my throat. The gaunt man stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes wild but less hostile than before. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, almost resigned. "I found your journal," I admitted. "I didn't mean to invade your space." He took a slow step forward, the tension in his frame easing just a fraction. "Nobody comes here by accident," he muttered. "They think they can just walk in and take what they want. But this place, it's all I have left." "Why are you following me?" I asked, voice steady despite the fear. His gaze dropped to the journal in my hands. "Because you remind me of them. The ones who left me. The ones who betrayed me." I swallowed, realizing this was more than a man defending his territory. This was a man broken by something I didn't understand yet, something I had to uncover if I wanted to get out of this alive. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked through the trees. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a branch snapped. The man's eyes flicked toward the noise, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear there. "They're coming," he whispered. "I have to go." Before I could react, he vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone with the journal and the unsettling thought that I wasn't the only one out here. Something or someone was watching us both. I stood frozen, the weight of the mountain pressing down on me. The trail ahead was no longer just a path. I had stepped into a web of secrets and dangers I couldn't yet see. And turning back meant walking straight into the unknown. Something told me the worst was still waiting just beyond the trees. Heartbeat pounding, I tightened my grip on the journal and forced my feet forward. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sharpened my senses. The mountain silence felt alive, as if holding its breath, waiting. I didn't sleep. Morning came with no relief. The sun's pale light filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and recoil with every breath of wind. I stood, shoulders stiff from the cold and restless night, and pocketed the journal. My legs felt heavier now, weighted by doubt and a gnawing sense of something closing in. I had to find him. Not because I wanted to confront him again, but because I needed answers. The journal hinted at a past so tangled and raw that it was impossible to ignore. I couldn't just walk away and pretend I hadn't seen the fractures beneath his wild stare. The trail was slippery from last night's dew, and every step felt like moving through a half-forgotten dream, vivid but somehow unreal. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to catch that familiar silhouette, the gaunt man with eyes like broken glass, trailing just out of sight. But the forest remained silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird. Then, a sound shifted the air. Soft, deliberate footsteps paced exactly like mine. My heart thudded unevenly. I stopped and held my breath. The footsteps stopped. I waited. The forest seemed to lean in, expectant. I moved again, and the footsteps followed, matching my rhythm perfectly. This time, I didn't try to hide or run. I wanted to see who was there, to confront the shadow that had been stalking me since yesterday. "Show yourself," I called out, voice stronger than I felt. A figure emerged from the trees ahead, stepping onto the trail with slow, unnatural calm. It was him, the gaunt man. His eyes flicked to mine, wild but calculating, and for a moment, he said nothing. "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, the same quiet warning as before. "I'm not leaving until you tell me why you're watching me," I said, voice steady but edged with something I hadn't expected, defiance. He looked away, then back, as if wrestling with himself. "I'm not the danger you think," he said finally. "But out here, danger wears many faces." I frowned. "Then who is it? Who else?" His jaw clenched. "They come down from the ridge. Men with guns. Men who don't want this place disturbed. They think I'm hiding something. Maybe I am. But what they want, it's not just land or secrets. It's control. The weight of his words pressed down on me. Control. Power. Fear. I realized then that I had wandered into a conflict far older and more violent than a lone hermit's madness. "Why did you let me see the journal?" I asked. "Because you remind me of what I lost," he said, voice breaking. "I thought if you understood, maybe you wouldn't run. Maybe you'd help." Before I could respond, a sudden rustling exploded from the underbrush. The man tensed, eyes darting toward the noise. "They're here," he whispered. From the shadows behind us, shapes moved, 3 figures, heavy with purpose and menace, their faces obscured by caps and scarves. "We don't want trouble," one called out, voice low and hard. "Step aside. This is private land." I glanced at the man, whose body was coiled like a spring. Then back at the strangers, who were closing in. Fear tightened in my chest, but beneath it, something sharper, resolve. I wasn't about to be another lost soul on this mountain. The man's wild eyes met mine one last time. "Stay close. Trust no one." And with that, he disappeared into the trees, vanishing like a ghost. I was left standing on the trail, caught between the strangers and the wilderness, with the mountain watching, waiting for what would come next. The strangers hesitated, their murmurs flickering like shadows among the trunks. I caught fragments, words like trap, signal, and something about the old marker. None of it made sense yet, but the tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed me, not quite friendly, not quite hostile. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and edged with warning. "This isn't a place for tourists or lost hikers." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat but held his gaze. "I'm not lost," I said firmly. "I'm looking for something." His expression flickered, maybe surprise, maybe recognition. "Looking for what?" he asked. Before I could answer, a sudden rustle echoed nearby, snapping everyone's attention toward the thick brush. The strangers stiffened, hands instinctively moving toward their pockets or belts. My heart hammered, not just from the proximity of these men, but from whatever was out there watching us all. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, not the man who had warned me, but someone new. A woman, her face streaked with dirt and determination. She locked eyes on the tall stranger and said, "You're not going to lead her into this mess, not again." The tension shifted instantly, electric and dangerous. The tall man's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he gestured sharply, and the group began to retreat, melting back into the forest's grasp like phantoms. With the strangers gone, the woman turned to me, her gaze piercing. "You don't know what you're tangled in," she said quietly. "But if you want to survive this mountain, you're going to have to learn fast and trust someone." I nodded slowly, the weight of the mountain's secrets pressing down on me. The path ahead was darker than I'd imagined, but now, at least, I wasn't alone. Dawn broke sluggishly through the dense canopy, pale light spilling over the forest floor like cold ash. Mara stood beside me, her sharp eyes blinking open and immediately scanning the woods. "You're awake," she said, voice rough but steady. I nodded. "I haven't slept properly in days. I keep thinking about that man, the one who was stalking me. The way he moved, always just behind, always watching." She sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "He's been here a long time. Off the grid, like I was once. But he's not like me, not anymore. He's broken. Obsessed with control, with the mountain. Keeping anyone else out, or worse." I swallowed hard, The memory of that gaunt figure, the wild eyes, the skeletal frame etched painfully into my mind. What did he want from me? Why follow me like that? Mara hesitated, then said quietly, "He thinks the mountain belongs to him. He's been here so long, he's convinced himself that anyone else is a threat. You were trespassing in his world." She looked away, voice dropping. "He's dangerous. And not just because he's unpredictable. He's been watching you, waiting for you to slip up." The words settled over me like a shroud. I thought about how I'd been so sure I could handle this hike alone, how I convinced myself that the wilderness was just a place to find peace, to find myself. But the mountain had other plans. It had almost swallowed me whole. We packed up silently, the weight of unspoken fears hanging between us. Mara led the way down the trail, moving with a practiced ease that made my clumsy steps feel even more out of place. As we walked, she told me more about the mountain's history, the old marker the strangers had mentioned, a faded sign warning hikers away from certain areas, because of accidents and disappearances over decades. "Most people don't know," she said, "but this place holds a kind of wildness that doesn't forgive mistakes." I glanced at her, the fire of survival still burning in her eyes. "How did you end up here? Living off the grid, like him?" She smiled, bitter and small. "I ran from a life that nearly broke me. At first, the mountain was freedom. But freedom's a double-edged sword. You pay a price, and sometimes you end up as lost as the ghosts who walk the trees." The trail wound downward, the air growing warmer, the forest thinning. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was leaving behind the mountain, the danger, the fear, the mystery, but also a part of myself I hadn't known was locked inside. The part that could survive, even when everything seemed against me. Near the trailhead, we stopped. The sound of distant cars and faint voices filtered through the trees, a reminder of the world waiting beyond the wilderness. Mara looked at me, her gaze steady and unexpected. "You're stronger than you think. But don't forget, sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to ask for help." I nodded, the lessons of the mountain heavy but clear. "Thank you, Mara, for everything." She shrugged, a small smile breaking through. "Take care of yourself. And maybe stick to the marked trails next time." As we parted ways, I felt the strange, lingering echo of the mountain inside me. It wasn't just a place of fear and shadows, it was a crucible, reshaping the edges of who I was. Driving away, the forest shrinking behind me, I realized that I hadn't just escaped a stalker or a wilderness nightmare. I'd confronted the fragile line between control and chaos in the wild, and inside myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real journey all along. The road stretched ahead, winding through valleys dusted in fading light, and I found my thoughts drifting back to the mountain's hold on me. There was something about those tangled trees and jagged cliffs that refused to loosen its grip. It wasn't simply the adrenaline or the primal fear I'd felt, it was a reminder that beneath the veneer of everyday normalcy, there's a wilderness waiting to break free. A wilderness not only in the woods but also woven deep inside, in the quiet spaces of the mind. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those dark pines looming closer, but all that remained was the hum of the engine and the steady pulse of the tires on asphalt. The solitude of the drive gave me time to reflect on what I'd learned, and what I had yet to understand. The mountain had stripped away my layers of certainty and left me exposed, vulnerable, but strangely more alive. It wasn't just about surviving the night, it was about facing the parts of myself I tried to keep hidden, the doubts, the fears, the restless hunger for something beyond routine. That restless hunger was what had drawn me there in the first place, the promise of a test, a story, a connection to something vast and ancient. And though the mountain had pushed me to the edge, it had also whispered a challenge, to carry its wildness with me, to remember that life's balance is fragile, and sometimes the only way forward is through the dark. As twilight deepened, the distant glow of the town welcomed me back, not as a refuge, but as a reminder that the world stretched beyond the trees and shadows. I knew I would return to the mountain again, not just to hike or explore, but to confront that intricate dance between order and chaos that had begun reshaping the edges of who I was. For now, though, the road was enough, a ribbon of possibility winding into the unknown, with the mountain's echo lingering like a secret promise beneath my skin.